Hello, hello, hello. Sorry, I'm eating granola while we're getting set up. So we're just taking a look. We're going to get Counter Revolution in here. He's going to talk to us about how all the shit that we were hearing about postmodern neo-Marxists is fucking real. Bunch of lying-ass commie sacks of shit. So, unfortunately, because OBS likes to fucking, reset my shit all the time, I'm looking to set up the comment section. Where's chat? It's so frustrating. I don't fucking know. Basically, sorry, chat. You might be on your own. I might have to pull you up, but independently on my current screen, and then just checking on you every now and then. So that's probably what we're going to do. Sorry if this is an unprofessional beginning, but we're just rolling into it. And by the way, I've had a fuck of a week. So just to share my fuck of a week. I'm doing good at work. So, okay, so number one, let's actually start the show. Yay! Clapped. Professional. Whatever. So, basically, I actually had a pretty good week. The Ukrainian fundraiser raised like 4K. I have we've already donated 1,500. I'm donating another 1,500 next month when like it clears with like YouTube and all that kind of stuff. And so far the Ukrainians look good. They look like they'll be there in a couple of weeks when I want to send them more money. I do have a friend who's in a Western Ukrainian city who's taking in refugees. And then I also have a direct link. It's called Come Back Alive for Ukraine. And they basically do non-lethal support for the Ukrainian army. So we got $1,000 to the army. We got $500 to my friend who's on the ground. We'll get another $1,500 to them over the next month. So that'll be $3,000 just from us, from viewers like you, and from the channel. Basically, our monthly proceeds are going in as well. And then also I had a work bonus that I threw in the pot. So awesome. The fact that we could bring 4K. Also, a little bit of a shout out to the lefty commie piece of shit streamers that we normally would criticize for being a bunch of do nothing blowhard assholes. But Hassan Piker raised. Oh, thank you for the dono. So 300, I think he did like 200K, 300K, something like that. And then Vosh did 200, 300K. And then started beefing with JK Rowling on Twitter. Fucking hilarious. So, basically they took all of Vosh's shitposts, took it seriously. And then he got canceled for being a misogynist. And then all the ironic misogynists and the TERFs went to war. But are you counter-revolution? This is going to be my commie or anti-commie friend. All right, sweet. So let's do it. Without further ado, let's it's going to be kind of like a chiller night. I appreciate you guys being here. I'm going to pull up the chat on a different thing. So I appreciate you guys being here. We're going to start getting into a conversation with our boy Counter Revolution. We're going to give him a call now. We'll see what's up, and we'll talk about how the commies are actually going to come kill us all. So let's do it. Da-da-da-da-da. Hey, buddy. Can you hear me?
Yep. Can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine. And then say hello to chat however you want to identify yourself. That would be awesome. And then I'm just going to scroll into my YouTube feed real quick. Say hello to chat. Basically see who did a dono. So,
sure. What's up, chat?
Yeah. So counter. So counterpoints and what do you want to go by?
Counter Revolution's fine.
All right, so Counterpoints and Counter Revolution, the counter buddies. So I didn't even put that together. But basically, yeah, Wang Dong, we're gonna do questions at the end of the thing. So we'll run for about an hour with Counter Revolution. We'll run for about an hour with our friend Dr. Thomas Concepts talking about metamodernism and religion. And then basically what we have here is Counter Revolution is going to run us through some of his ideas. Where, correct me if I'm wrong. As a matter of fact, why don't you introduce yourself, who you are, what your interests are, and then kind of like the crux of the evening. That way, I'm not talking for you.
Oh, sure. So I guess, God, I've been following, I guess you can call it wokeness for about 10 years now.
Mm-hmm.
First, I guess I got my undergraduate in mechanical engineering, but afterwards I had to jump into philosophy and neo-Marxist literature to actually understand what's going on. And I'm actually reading the chat, and Swoletariat's just incorrect.
Well,
He's cor-
Swoletariat and I, we often disagree. And if
well,
you,
he's correct that they're contradictory. They can't be together technically.
Mhm.
But the academic term exists. It's called critical constructivism.
Yeah.
If
So,
you don't care about traditional, or should I say, what's it called, pure reason, and you care about practical reason, what's functional, then you can put those two together without an issue.
yeah, so you might be a little bit more academic than me, but basically what I would say is I will try to bring up some of the objections that I would feel lefty or more centrist people might bring up, or like for why this is bullshit. But Swoletariat, even I have a video basically breaking down what I view, the term postmodern neo-Marxism, which I know like people like shit their pants over, but postmodern meaning kind of like in I hate to say anti-realism, but kind of like the meta narrative that not all there isn't like an objectively true narrative, and that all narratives should be like balanced against each other, and this, that, the other. Postmodern thinking in that respect, and then neo-Marxism taking the Marxist concept, the Marxist formula of the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, and then applying it to social issues where there's like power classes and all that kind of shit. And in order for us to have an egalitarian world, you have to break down these hierarchy and social distinctions. So you can say like, oh well, Marxism is a economic material philosophy, and I'll agree with you. But if you deny that the formula is different, then I don't even know if we're talking in the same world. But anyways,
So,
why don't you kind of
so
launch into it?
okay, so we kind of have to actually get into what neo-Marxism is, because everybody knows what classical Marxism is.
Mm-hmm.
So, I guess the transition occurs around the beginning or just before World War One,
Mm-hmm.
where I guess they were trying to. Everyone knew the war was coming. No one was surprised when it happened. But what the socialists thought at the time was that there's not a chance in hell the proletariat was going to fight for the capitalists they were supposed to overthrow. So what they thought would happen was they would go on strike, throw down their weapons, refuse to fight, and that's how the revolution would start. Of course, that was absolutely incorrect. None of it happened. This is also the same event which caused Mussolini to go, oh fuck, nationality is a very good way to organize people.
Mm-hmm.
And then he gets Italy into World War One and goes on to create the philosophy of fascism. But the straw that broke the camel's back was the failed the failed Hungarian communist revolution in 1919. Um, at this point in history, the only successful communist or socialist revolution that had ever occurred was in Tsarist Russia, which is not the Western advanced capitalism or a Western liberal democracy where Marx said it would occur. So they had to try and figure out what happened, right? Because clearly Marx is wrong. So what they concluded was that the early reforms that Marx has pushed helped stabilize capitalism,
Mm-hmm.
as well as the factor that Marx never even considered, which is that culture is ultimately stabilizing.
Yeah, can I
And,
yeah, so I want to make this like a dialogue between the two of us, just so they're not
sure.
like, why are you platforming this fascist neo-Nazi talking head who's blah blah blah. So that's actually one of the interesting historical theories about FDR as well. A lot of modern Americans, conservatives and fiscal libertarians, think that he was basically like a socialist or a communist who destroyed America by bringing in the welfare state, and they've been trying to undo his project for the past century. Whereas a lot of people view FDR's social redistributivism, economic redistributivism, as what like kind of like pacified the masses in order to not become either fascist or communist revolutionaries. So there's two ways of thinking about that, where the economic redistributivism is like this slippery slope into socialism and communism, and then also where economic redistributivism can postpone the socialist and Marxist revolution because you basically placate the masses.
Basically, yeah. I guess classical Marxism primarily operates in dialectical materialism, but since now the neo-Marxists are operating in culture, it's Hegelian idealism. The
Well,
goal's this. The goal's the same, right? They still
mhm.
want to overturn capitalism. It just you can't do it the way Marx originally planned, or at least not really planned, but sort of predicted, because it was just not going to happen. It wasn't guaranteed the way Marx said it would.
Right.
So you need to target culture.
Yeah. So just to kind of like preface this, and I'm happy to keep it moving rather briskly, actually, because there's not much that I disagree with. I'm not like some people are going to take this as like we are, or I am wholeheartedly saying that basically like every leftist is on the same page, where they're all like playing from a coordinated playbook in order to use culture as the Trojan horse to implement socialism or leftism. I don't think everybody's aware of the game plan, and we kind
Well,
of talk.
absolutely not.
Yeah, but I think there are some people who are smarter who absolutely want to use social forces in order to implement leftism, and I think that to deny that is kind of weird because they'll fucking tell you some of the time. So yeah, so where's the next step after? So World War One, World War One kind of kicks off. The socialists think that there's going to be a mass consciousness where people don't want to die for the rich people, and then it just doesn't happen. Then they say, oh shit. The only place that there's been a socialist revolution are basically places that we didn't predict, namely agrarian feudal societies like obviously China's fairly complex, so that might be a simplification, but there were significant parts of China that were not modernly developed. And then same thing with Russia. It was still like it was more feudal than it was like modern capitalist. So it seemed like the social theory wasn't working. Now what?
Well, in the beginning, it was primarily just criticism of culture broadly, and this
Mm-hmm.
is primarily what the Frankfurt School did.
Mm-hmm.
But there was another neo-Marxist thinker, who was probably the most important Marxist thinker since Marx himself, named Antonio Gramsci.
Mm-hmm.
He more or less develops the broader framework of, I guess you can call it a cultural revolution. But
Mm-hmm.
he doesn't call it a cultural revolution, he calls it a war of position.
Well, if it just seems like I'm nodding, it's because I think we discussed this previously.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Um, I mean, I have a bunch of his, and I can always post this on Twitter, just so
Mm-hmm.
people can see it. I have Antonio Gramsci's notebooks, or not really his, kind of like they're selections from his notebooks.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I can read some, but it's kind of complicated, or it's not really complicated. It's just going to be very boring, I guess.
Yeah, can I share because we had like a 2 to 3 hour conversation prior to this a few weeks ago, and if I could share the thing that was most revelatory to me was Gramsci kind of conceptualizing the world as a battlefield, and within that battlefield there was kind of these two armies that were lined up, and I mean basically the thing that I think was kind of remarkable about it was he oftentimes when you're a liberal, you don't feel like you have enemies. You don't feel like you have people who like oppose you because technically everybody can be implemented into the liberal framework because as long as they agree to freedom of conscience, freedom of speech, all that kind of shit, and like to obey the constitutional law, then basically they can all be incorporated even if they have like zealous beliefs. Whereas what Gramsci kind of, or what I took away from it was he viewed it as a battleground where a lot of people would either have to be convinced to be neutral or they would have to be convinced to be leftist or socialist in order to move the leftist agenda forward. So, would you mind kind of walking us through that?
Oh, sure. So he pretty much broke it down into two separate. He broke society down into two separate sections. One is I guess you could call it political society, and the other is civil society. Political society represents the state, while civil society represents the various cultural institutions like education, media, the family, religion. And for him, he uses the analogy of a war of maneuver. So, war of maneuver is effectively you target a forward trench, because again, this is kind of after World War One. You target a forward trench with artillery, and then you sort of burst through to capture the trench. This is what worked in Tsarist Russia, right? Because he says here, where is it? In the East, which is Russia, the state was everything. Civil society was primordial and gelatinous. In the West, there was a proper relation between state and civil society, so that when the state tottered, a sturdy structure of civil society was immediately revealed. Right? So basically, he's saying the East didn't have much of a civil society, the West does. And when you burst through, like in a war of position, your goal isn't to just burst through to the state, basically. Your goal is to target institutions. Because he compares the institutions to like defensive emplacements. So that even if you were to break through the trench, the defensive emplacements are still there to sort of stop the advance.
Yeah,
Does that
and
make sense?
so yeah, and not only does that make sense, I kind of want to expand on it. So basically, if you were in a modern capitalist society and you just try to seize the government as a leftist, you're just going to be rejected. Or if you try to seize the military, or if you just try to seize political power, you're going to be rejected. It's not going to work. So basically the way to position what you divide them into political society and civil society is
Mhm.
to use civil society as a launching point into political society. Did I summarize that correctly?
Pretty much. His good, I guess the first step in every cultural revolution or war of position would
Mm-hmm.
be to capture education.
Mm.
Because he had this concept called an organic intellectual.
Mm-hmm.
An organic, so instead of going to Marx's The People, he goes to what he calls the subaltern, which you can think of as all the marginalized groups of society. And his idea was to uh, educate the subaltern in class consciousness and then have them develop a countercultural hegemony. Because one of his other big ideas was the concept of cultural hegemony. In cultural hegemony, the idea was the values of a society was given to it by its elites through its institutions. So in order to counter those, you need to produce basically a brand new culture that
And
would bump heads into it.
and can so this is where I would get frustrated if like a leftist was like, "Oh, well, this is some like, 100-year-old dead motherfucker that nobody gives a shit about anymore." It's like, "Okay, but then we talk about like whiteness and blackness and the power dynamics and how to abolish them and the cis heteropatriarchy and all that kind of shit." It's like these are like the social constructions that fit like almost one to one into this worldview of, hey, there's a cultural hegemony, there's a political hegemony. In order to break into the political hegemony, you have to break through the cultural hegemony, and the best way to do that is to come up with your counterculture, that can make, kind of like you said, like war of maneuver gains into the culture, through these efforts. So that's kind of where for me it's like, even if you think this is all bullshit or most people haven't read Gramsci, it seems like at least a few people have read Gramsci. Basically, is what I would say.
Yeah, I mean, mostly academics and whatnot, but
Mm-hmm.
most people who know Gramsci just know cultural hegemony. They don't know the rest of it, or are
Mm-hmm.
not familiar with the rest of it.
Yeah. So one of the things about war of maneuver that you brought up that I like in a previous conversation that I thought was really interesting is that one of the conceptions, I don't know if it was Gramsci himself, was the fact that like you don't have to convince people to come be a part of your army. You don't have to convince everybody to be a socialist or a leftist. What you do have to convince people of is the fact that like they shouldn't bother defending either the political hegemony or the cultural hegemony as it exists, and you should basically bring them into the army of white flags. And so this analogy or metaphor that we were talking about was from, correct me if I'm wrong, but like Dante's Inferno, where there's a bunch of like centrists. There's a bunch of centrists who
Now we're
couldn't.
jumping ahead to
Mhm.
Mercuse's Great Refusal.
Ah, okay, okay. So I'm jumping ahead a little bit. Then you guide us there, but basically, just to finish the concept, so I don't feel like I half started a concept and then people are confused. The goal is not to get everybody onto your side. The goal is to get a lot of people to be neutral or ambivalent about modern society, and I think you can see that. But if you want to move us chronologically or narratively through those ideas, then I would appreciate that.
Yeah, so Gramsci dies in 37.
Mhm.
The fascists more or less uh, release him from prison because he's just physically exhausted and he dies then. And that same year, Max Horkheimer publishes Traditional and Critical Theory, in which he lays out the concept of a critical theory, which
And
is
who is
effectively
this author again?
Max Horkheimer. It was the first head of the Frankfurt School,
Okay.
neo-Marxist, who's basically developing the concept of a critical theory since even the Frankfurt School began.
Okay.
Um, it's more or less, if you were to take Karl Marx's hitherto philosophers have sought to, oh god, I can't even remember it. Hold on.
Well, dude, I don't think the specific references are as important as like narrativizing it, basically giving
Yeah,
you a
yeah,
good
okay.
script.
So he's more or less,
And
think of it as a strategic theory. It's
and
not
and
it's
and I
not
want you to
pure
think
reason of traditional
I want you
theory.
to think about this so we can maintain flow, okay?
Mhm.
There might be people who will be malding in chat because you keep using the term neo-Marxist. There might be people who are malding in chat because you're like, you didn't read that theorist correct. This is the way that you read this theorist. I don't give a shit. Let's narrativize it, get it through it,
No, 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 no,
so it's
that's fine.
digestible. And then what I was going to say is, in the future, let's say like Swoletariat or whoever is like, hey, you have an incorrect interpretation of these ideas. This is the real interpretation. Then we can have that conversation later on. You know what I'm saying? Like
No, that's fine.
I don't want you to think that you have to substantiate every single point that you have.
Yeah, yeah, that's fine. Um, Basically, it's just strategic theory. It tosses out pure reason for practical reason, basically, as well as having critique, because every critical theory has to have critique. Um, I mean, I don't have to go too much into Horkheimer. I feel like Horkheimer was a tad bit more difficult to read because he's laying out a theory which is more rooted in philosophy, while Gramsci is more or less shooting the shit in prison. Basically nothing else, nothing really changes. I don't think the Frankfurt School is particularly like insanely radical up until the 60s. The 60s changes everything. Then you get Herbert Marcuse, who's the second head of the Frankfurt School. And in 90 Herbert Marcuse is called the father of the New Left, and the New Left was the most radical portion of the 60s, the Marxists of the 60s. So he's an insanely important figure. If Gramsci comes up with the general concept of a cultural revolution, Horkheimer kind of develops a tool by which it can be fought. Then Marcuse develops sort of the broad strategy for throwing a cultural revolution in the United States, specifically. In 1969, he publishes, where is it? His essay on liberation. I don't want to go too much into this. Hmm. He more or less tosses class out as a possible explanation because for neo Marxists, what they believed was basically once you have a capitalist system that can develop a middle class, the proletariat sort of stabilizes. And when they stabilize, they sort of become dependent upon the system. And when they become dependent upon the system, they fight to keep the system. Right? This is kind of where they they always thought that capitalism was going to inevitably fail. But for the most part, advanced capitalism is a lot more stable than early capitalism. But because now you have this conservative force in society, when it fails, one of two things is going to happen. Either the socialists win, or the conservative forces develop into fascists. So it either goes socialism or fascism. Right? So here he's more or less rejecting labor as a source of revolution. He's saying objectively, in itself, labor still is the potentially revolutionary force. Subjectively, for itself, it is not. This theoretical conception has concrete significance in the prevailing situation in which the working class may help to circumscribe the scope of the targets of political practice. Basically, for themselves, they're not going to do it because they're dependent upon the system. They effectively like the system, which they'll
Well,
probably go into some type of brainwashing
well,
or
and
indoctrination.
and that's I get accused of that all the time, and I pointed at myself while we were talking. Because basically there are people like I'm not rich. I'm not a capital owner. I don't own a business. But I do think that redistributive mixed economy capitalism is an incredibly powerful force, and that it has yielded a lot of social and economic benefits to a shitload of fucking people, and as such, I think that I do defend it sometimes reflexively because it seems like the socialist and leftist revolutions of the past have been so absolute fucking dog shit and yielded some of the world's worst governments. It's kind of easy for me to try to reflexively defend these things. And so I think in some ways they were literally talking about me when you brought up those phrases.
Yeah, yeah. So he's basically tossing out class as a concept. It's why I guess we'll call it the woke or intersectional feminism doesn't really focus too much on class, right? Because that's one of the big things. You say that this is all neo-Marxist and whatnot, and they go, "What do you mean? They're not talking about class. Marxism's about class. Everybody knows that, right?" So now you have to contend with this thing where they kind of split away from class, and class is sort of at the periphery. He also goes on to indicate that in the United States, the best source of revolution comes from, well, he calls them the ghetto populations,
How
which I
woke?
guess would not woke. He wasn't like modern
No,
woke, but he
no, I
was.
I I mean from a lefty perspective, they'd be like, "Oh, cancel that motherfucker." He calls,
Yeah, yeah,
you
yeah.
know,
Well, he probably would have
fucking
been canceled. He's
yeah.
not. Yeah. The constellation which prevails in the metropolis of capitalism, namely the objectively necessary of radical change, and the paralysis of the masses, seems typical of a non revolutionary but pre revolutionary situation. The transition from the former of the latter presupposes a critical weakening of the global economy of capitalism and the intensification and extension of the political work, radical enlightenment. It is precisely the preparatory character of this work which gives its historical significance. To develop in the exploited the consciousness and the unconscious, which would loosen the hold of enslaving needs over their existence, the needs which perpetuate their dependence on the system of exploitation. Without this rupture, which can only be the result of political education and action, even the most elemental, the most immediate force of rebellion may be defeated, or become the mass basis of counter-revolution. The ghetto population of the United States God, I'm having a stroke.
Constituency.
Constitutes such a force,
Oh, okay. Yeah.
right? So basically, labor is at the periphery, race is at the forefront.
Mhm.
And he repeats it multiple times, actually. Um, the fact is that at present in the United States, the black population appears as the most natural force of rebellion. Basically, and anytime he mentions, like, because if you go into his essay on liberation and you do Control F and you look for ghetto populations, anytime he mentions them, he also mentions the what's it? The militant intelligista, right?
Okay.
So radical academics.
Mm-hmm.
So that's also part of it. Um, basically, his essay on liberation is radical as hell, right? He actually has an argument with Jorgen Habermas, who would later become the third head of the Frankfurt School, basically saying that your idea is only going to ever lead to attention at the universities, which he's correct, because if I have to guess anything, the conservatives are going to go pretty hard against education broadly. You're already kind of seeing that in Virginia, and it's probably only going to get much more expansive from
Well,
here.
so I guess that's my question is like it seems like on one hand this is kind of my frustration with a lot of these conversations is on one hand like yes we're leftists, we have the right ideas, we need to be revolutionary, we need to build a unity of movement across a broad swath of people, disenfranchised, you hear this shit like people of color and trans folk and like all that kind of stuff. And then basically when you think about the oppression Olympics and like all that kind of shit. Like the all of this narrative framework makes sense from a specific framework that basically says, yeah, like we have to get all these people to band together in order to attack the white cis hetero patriarchal hegemonic construct. So that's where for
Subaltern.
so yeah, so this is kind of my frustration is like so if we were talking about like Vosh or any other progressive or leftist, they'd be like, oh, this is all conspiracy theory, and it's like, I don't know, man. It kind of feels like it fits right into what the fuck you're saying. So yeah.
Yeah, so he more or less, where is it? Here it is. His idea is basically this: politicize the universities. Oh, actually, I'll just read it. What appears as extraneous politicization of the universities by disrupting radicals is today, as it was so often in the past, the logical internal dynamic of education. Translation of knowledge into reality, of humanistic values into humane conditions of existence. The dynamic arrested by the pseudo neutral forces or features of academia would, for example, be released by the inclusion into the curriculum of courses giving adequate treatment to the great nonconformist movements in civilization and to the critical analysis of contemporary societies. The groundwork for building the bridge between the ought and the is, between theory and practice, is laid within theory itself. Basically, politicize the universities, which is exactly what they did. Um, where is it? The inclusion into the curriculum of courses giving adequate treatment to the great nonconformist movements in civilization. So I was watching this today.
Oh no, you got a clip?
We don't have to actually watch it, right?
No, no,
But
do it if you if
Destiny
you
was
can.
reading the CRT textbook, and this bottom line in Center Ethnomathematics
Mhm.
expose students to examples of people who have used math as resistance. So
Right.
that's echoing Marcuse's line there, right? The great nonconformist movements in civilization.
So hold up. So was this like was this elementary? Was this high school? Was this college? What was this? That class or book from?
Oh, I mean, I imagine it's elementary, or it could be elementary or high school,
That's fucking crazy.
because
So
they're getting them while they're young. They're like it's not.
okay, but that's where like I so the word from liberals and progressives and leftists is that CRT is not being taught. It's basic anti-racism, right?
Um, so that's CRT is not literally being taught, but
But you
and we're
think,
kind of got
you're thinking like ideas that are spawned from CRT are
it's called critical race pedagogy.
okay.
In 1994, Gloria Ladson Billings writes towards a critical race theory of education.
Mhm.
And this is sort of like the beginning of the creation of critical race pedagogy. So from the mid 90s onward. So this is when it actually gets introduced into schools. And I know for a fact it's in schools. Where is it? Because there's an entire industry surrounding it.
Hmm.
Can you see that?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, there's a shit ton of books on it. There's a shit ton of textbooks on it. It's in schools, right?
Hmm.
Um so anyway, he actually writes a second essay called Counter Revolution Revolt in 1972. Hmm, where do I want to start this? Free schools? He talks about the importance of developing, I mean, of using quote unquote free universities, right? Because again, any cultural revolution requires the production of organic intellectuals. Basically, intellectuals from the various marginalized groups who can lead the counter hegemony.
Hmm.
He also talks about the importance of the student movement. He actually talks about that in his essay on liberation as well.
So can I, you're more familiar with these texts than I am. Can I ask like why is the hegemony? So if we're talking about like cis hetero patriarchal white dominated whatever, why is that like viewed as evil, or like why is it like
Well, they're
reviled to the?
leftists. They're
Hmm.
basically they're against. They're for anyone they view as oppressed and against anyone they view as the oppressor.
Oh,
Right.
right.
White
So.
people have historically oppressed minorities, so they're against white people.
Hmm.
Men have historically possessed or oppressed women, so they're against men. Um, I guess what could we call it? People who have fit traditional gender roles oppress trans, straights oppress gays, and so on and so forth. This is just the collection of all of them rolled into one bundle.
Yeah, but then they do talk about that like social role of ally. You know what I'm saying? Like basically like the white men who recognize that they're fucking evil, or they need to fucking admit their whiteness and their straightness and their this and their that. So how do you socially view those people within these framework? Because basically that's what they don't see it as like an elimination of their. Well, although I guess they do talk about the elimination of their identity, don't they? They talk about fucking gender abolition, and they talk about fucking racial abolition. So never mind, never fucking
So
mind.
I don't
Yeah.
I don't necessarily think. I mean, I could be incorrect here,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm not fully certain that they want to abolish race.
Mm-hmm. Well, not now,
That's a
anyways.
well, that's a very liberal thing
Mm-hmm.
because the second like because I watched Destiny try and like debate this, and he always says it's a lens by which we can view society. The
Mm-hmm.
lens it is primarily, I guess you can call it a federation of ethno-nationalists and ethno-separatists, with black
Mm-hmm.
nationalism and black separatism at the like the basically the head of the table.
Okay.
I don't know. It just to me, and I'm this is just an opinion. I don't know. I don't have anything to back this up. I find it hard to believe that a group of people who take so much pride in their race and seem to be acquiring quite a bit of power as a result of it would just give up the very concept.
Well, for
Because like,
sure, but then that's where the no, I don't want to say no true Scotsman, but the no true Scotsman fallacy would kind of apply, where it's like, oh well, we created this counter hegemony with a bunch of people from marginalized statuses, and then we use the power structure in order to challenge the cis white hetero patriarchy or whatever. But now the people who got drunk with their own power and they just wanted to recreate, ethno states in reverse, those are actually people that we have to disavow, because the real people, the real leftists, are the people who want to abolish, all hierarchy. You know what I'm saying? Like
yeah, yeah,
they want to abolish race, they want to abolish gender, they want to abolish class, and like all that kind of shit. So that's where the whereas I'm sure there's plenty of militant, quote unquote, ghetto fucking populations or whatever who'd be like, no, the militancy is part of my identity and I need it as a defense mechanism against like cis white hetero fucking violence and like all that kind of bullshit. So that's where there would probably be infighting between abolitionists and non-abolitionists.
yeah. Again, that's just my opinion. I don't know if it's actually like
Well, to be honest, I see this fight in Vosh's community all the time between the abolitionists and non-abolitionists. Like it's already a fight that they
okay.
deal with.
Well, like the other thing is, I think this was Delgado and Stefanek's like introduction to critical race theory.
Mm-hmm.
They mention that one of the aspects of critical race theory is to be very suspect of individual rights. Individual rights are, they say individual rights are alienating, is the term they use.
Yeah, can I? Okay, so that let's like kind of summarize so far, and then let's like move into the modern era, because I think that this is like an important distinction, where we had Gramsci leading into, was it like there was another guy that wasn't as important, then Marcuse,
Well,
the
Horkheimer was important.
okay,
Horkheimer was really important, but like,
mm-hmm,
I guess for our story, he's not that important. But in the
right.
grand scheme of things, he creates the very concept that pretty much defines the entire Frankfurt School and is now defining much of what you see as wokeness.
Okay. So Warkheimer is important, but just not for our individual narrative. Then,
Correct.
then, leading into Marcuse, and then now, what is the bridge between Marcuse and modern shit?
Well, first, where is it? He calls for cultural revolution explicitly in Counter Revolution and Revolt.
Mm-hmm.
Cultural revolution, the phrase in the West, first suggests that ideological developments are ahead of developments at the base of society, where base is the means of production.
Mm-hmm.
Because in Marxian theory, base is your means of production. Your superstructure is basically everything external to, or indirectly related to the means of production. So cultural production, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's basically calling for it. And then I guess our bridge between Mercusa and basically, I guess, modern universities comes from, where is it? There was an educator, or like an education professor, by the name of Isaac Gottsman, who wrote A Critical Turn in Education. I think that was 2017, where he sort of outlines basically the entire evolution of the education field from like 1969 onward. And this is a selection from his book. To the question, where did all the 60s radicals go? The most accurate answer, noted Paul Booth, in this classic Marxism of the United States, would be neither to the religious cults nor yuppiedom, but to the classroom. After the fall of the New Left, arose a new left, an academic left. For many of these young scholars, Marxist thought, and particularly what some refer to as Western Marxism, or Neo-Marxism, and what I will refer to as critical Marxist tradition, was an intellectual anchor. As participants in the radical politics of the 60s entered graduate school, and moved into faculty positions and started publishing, the critical turn began to change scholarship throughout the humanities and social sciences. The field of education was no exception. So
Keep it
basically,
going, boy.
Sorry. One
they
second.
went into the universities and captured effectively the schools of education, right? Because every cultural revolution begins by capturing education.
Well, I thought that by being so academic, we were going to be losing some folks, but the truth is they're fighting super hard in chat.
Yeah, I see that.
Well, you should ignore chat for now.
Yeah.
But so basically, yeah, so we see this through line, and then you brought up a name that I think like a decent chunk of people are familiar with, which is Delgado. And
Yeah.
I think, if I remember correctly, like Delgado and a host of several other characters are like the modern critical theorists who are gaining some level of popular notoriety in our pop culture to the point that they're like writing children's books and doing talk shows and going on like MSNBC and being consultants whenever there's a police shooting and like all that kind of shit. So like what can you kind of walk us through that, I guess, from your perspective?
From like just them?
Well, yeah. So basically, like what I was trying to do before I got distracted, trying to make sure that we were still live and everything's working out technically. Basically, what I see is I see a bunch of fucking white dudes who are socialists and leftists who realize that the ideas that they followed and loved weren't going to be implemented the way that the original authors did, and they probably were trying to write their own story within that story of like leftist and social revolution. So they were probably trying to say like, oh, I'm going to create this idea that's going to inspire this generation of leftists to act in this way. So they've all kind of put their like little flow, but up until the 60s or 70s, it seems like it's a decent chunk of like white intellectual, like radical intellectuals who are looking for their revolutionary socialist shit. But then one of the things that I think you mentioned was the fact that like the universities are going to have to create quote unquote their own organic academics, basically academics, who are people of color, who are
Or
from these
people of
marginalized
color,
groups.
women, trans, basically the whole gamut.
Right, but these people can create their like you said, or when I hear organic, I think like natural. That's what I think.
Yeah.
So if I'm thinking of like natural, even if these ideas don't align with Marcuse or whatever, like it doesn't matter because these are the organic intellectuals that they've been looking for to kind of lead the new spearhead of the counter hegemony. So that's where I would see a historical delineation between like the white dude academics who are looking for the next way to bring about leftist revolution into the organic, quote unquote, organic academics who are now taking up the mantle.
Yeah. Think of it this way. After Macusa publishes his essays, he is more or less kicked out of higher education by Ronald Reagan. So I know for a fact that the higher
You need to say that sentence again. What?
Mercuse is basically because he's God, I can't remember. He's in is it UC Davis? I think he was a professor at.
Mm-hmm.
So he was in the California university system,
Mm-hmm.
and at the time, Ronald Reagan was the governor.
Okay.
So Ronald Reagan put pressure on UC or on whatever university he was at, and eventually he just kind of was pushed out entirely. He ended up going back to Germany.
Wow. That's fucking crazy. Okay. Yeah. So that's super interesting. That like
Yeah, so the higher up conservatives have to know who he is and have to
right.
have some idea of what's going on.
Okay. So all right. So I mean that's just fascinating to me because we do think of these worlds as like kind of separate, like academics and politics and all that kind of stuff. But you're saying these worlds are more intertwined than maybe I gave them credit for, which is
Yeah,
Ronald Reagan knew who Mercusa was and thought, hey, here's this.
he was a sufficient enough threat that he had to be removed from the university system.
That's amazing and interesting. Yeah, so I think we're good there for a start. And then okay, so
Basically,
mhm.
after Mercusa does his thing and is kicked out, you can think of it as this: all the radicals just grab everything and just chuck everything at the wall to see what sticks.
Well, which
Everything is ultimately serving neo-Marxism,
mhm.
but like postmodernism, feminism, or ethno-nationalism, ethno-separatism, social constructivism, all of that is just mixed together into this thing for this broader cultural revolution.
Right. So yeah, but this would be something that I would view as like, like you said, you throw shit at the wall and see what sticks.
Basically,
But I would also see this as kind of like a natural reaction to the historical forces of the 80s and 90s, because if you're basically talking about like Reagan kicking Bercusa out in the 70s or 80s, because that was kind of Reagan's like heyday. I'm not sure when he was the governor, but I'm sure it was in the 70s and 80s.
it was in the 70s.
Yeah, the
No,
70s.
he was elected. So
Mm-hmm.
actually, like the education, or at least their role in education, is broken into three parts.
Mm-hmm.
You have critical pedagogy from like the late 60s to the mid 70s, or mid 80s, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have post-structural feminism taking over from the mid 80s to the mid 90s, and then after that you have critical race theory, right?
Mm-hmm.
But um God, what was I going to say?
Well, I'll tell you what I was going to say is that let's say that you get kicked out, you go back to Germany or whatever. During the 80s and 90s, it seems like there's a significant political pushback against like socialism and communism, where the Soviet Union collapses and there's a normalization of trade relations between China and the United States. So it seems like if you were to use China as your last great hope for like leftism in the world, they're selling out. If you're looking at Russia as the last great hope, or the Soviet Union as the last great hope, they collapse. So there's probably a moment of
Well,
confusion and Sorry, go ahead.
they reject the Soviet Union.
Interesting. Why?
Like Mercusa rejects this because it was a shit show.
Okay.
It
Well
was an
then.
absolute shit show from what they actually wanted because
Mm-hmm.
Mercusa was a libertarian socialist.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
So he
so
wasn't necessarily a
he didn't
fan of
he
that.
didn't want the Oth shit anyways.
Although ironically he did praise Mao's revolution.
Okay, well, probably because it was more proletarian. But the point, my point being that if you were like a leftist, it was probably easier to be a leftist in the 60s than it was to be in the late 70s or 80s, just because
Well,
of
you know what happens?
What?
So they're very, very, very radical in the 70s, the
Mhm.
60s and 70s, and then stagnation in the mid late 70s, and that's your first blow against the left. And then Ronald Reagan's election in 1980, which basically just annihilates the Democrats entirely. And that's like so that's the rise of neoconservatism, and that's what like at that point they're basically like, okay, revolution's not going to work. We need to do revisionism.
Mhm.
Still cultural revolution, mind you, but it's like they're going to try and change things slowly instead of just outright revolution.
Right, but wouldn't that fall back in line with kind of like Gramsci or whatever saying that like this would be my perspective because I think we talked about this within like the Gramscian perspective. If you one of the things that we talked about was like you have armies, right? You have the armies of revolutionaries, you have the armies of counter-revolutionaries, and you have kind of like the army of the white flag, which might be a different philosopher, but still. So you basically have people, you have centrists who won't take a side. You have people who are adamantly pro leftist, and then you have people who are prominently anti leftist. Those are kind of like your three camps. So if you're trying to do that, I think you mentioned this. During an economic catastrophe or social upheaval, you can use that as like a preliminary, artillery bombardment in order to seize cultural power. But if you find your artillery or if you find the other side well defended, you might get pushed back. So what I would see from like the Gramscian perspective of like militant struggle, it's pretty clear that they got they had some artillery bombardments that might have had some minor successes, but then they got pushed back. And so that doesn't really mean that the leftists are done. That just means that they have to reorganize and find a new strategy, and that's where I would say knowingly or unknowingly a lot of like intersectional and progressive and like maybe not socialists but leftists probably find themselves as part of the army of the social revolutionaries, whether they know it or not.
Mm.
From a Gramscian perspective.
Yeah, you actually still see Gramsci and like they're semi explicit with Gramsci
Mhm.
because they keep talking about white supremacy culture and whatnot. That's your cultural hegemony. Although they sometimes they refer to it as dominant culture, which is sort of like the same thing.
Right.
Effectively, it's liberalism. Well,
Which,
not just liberalism; it's other things, but it's also liberalism.
yeah. Whereas liberalism views itself as like a syncretic governmental and social force which can incorporate many disparate worldviews as long as you subscribe to like some fundamental basic like social precepts. And I think that's why as like a liberal or somebody with like libertarian sympathies and somebody who is a mixed economy capitalist apologist, somebody who finds myself in the counter-revolutionary camp or army in a Gramscian like metaphorical perspective, the reason why I like the Gramscian war analogy is because basically you can pick what camp you want to be in. Do you want to be in the leftist camp where you're trying to achieve like socialism, communism, or egalitarianism? Do you want to be in kind of like the centrist camp where you don't really give a fuck and as long as people leave you alone, or you're so ambivalent because of like the malaise of your own life that you're not going to pick a side? Or are you going to be like an anti-leftist, an anti-revolutionary, a counter-revolutionary, if you will? And so that's kind of where the simplicity of that vision was really appealing to me, because it kind of solidified my role. Whereas I would have thought of myself as so disoriented that I would have been a part of the army of white flags. Now I find myself like kind of knowingly in the counter-revolutionary or anti-leftist perspective, and not because I don't think like leftists have something to add to society, but I think they have to be filtered through the people that counterbalance them, and they can't be left to their own devices because they're so fucking destructive.
Mhm.
So that's kind of my perspective.
Yeah, like the culture war we've had since the '90s is more, or since the early '90s is more or less conservatives trying to push back against the Cultural Revolution.
Well, so that kind of brings us a question, because now there's some people who are overt, like I think we mentioned Delgado. There might be a few other people, like anti-racist baby is in my house right now. I don't know who that author is, but I
Isn't
guarantee
it
you,
Ibram X. Kendi, I believe?
yeah, probably. So I
And I think
have.
he just had an interview where he said, because
Mm,
originally when you bring him up, they said, well, he's not a critical race theorist, he's an historian.
uh-huh.
But then I think he had an interview lately where he said none of his anti-racist work makes any sense outside the context of critical race theory. So
Right.
even that's
So
horseshit.
right. So
I'm so used to just leftists lying through their teeth about everything. I
but
think they
the
just find it fun. I don't know.
But the point being that, like, I had, so if he said that, where he's like, oh well, my anti-racism work only makes sense through the lens of critical theory. Well, I have literally a fucking children's book in my house right now from a fucking critical theorist. You know what I'm saying? So that's where, again, like, I think there can be ideas that can be filtered through our society that could be positive, like, don't be a fucking racist dickhole. I think that's a perfectly fine and perfectly tenable idea. But then I find it kind of nefarious that it's like, oh, I'm a critical theorist. Oh, I'm not. Oh, I am. Oh, I'm not. Like, like, it's just it's frustrating that there doesn't seem to be like a consistent, overt, communicated message, and then it's so contradictory. But then what you find when you get into the leftist circles is they contradict the fuck out of each other. They don't even agree on what they're doing, because like they're so anti-hierarchical that they can't even choose like a consistent position to advocate for, because they're too busy fighting over who's going to be the fucking leader of the revolution. Um, so yeah, so anyways, but so I guess my question is, do you have any major ideas or thoughts um, of like that's left from the 60s, 70s white guys? Do you have any major ideas or thoughts that need to be discussed from the new generation that kind of comes from the 90s and into the thousands and into the modern era?
At the moment, probably not.
Mm-hmm.
Like I've been trying to understand everything that's happened over the past 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
I have to guess that the conservatives knew what was happening to some extent, because
Mm-hmm.
by 1995 you had the Republican Revolution, is what they call it, where the Republicans take over Congress, and
Mm-hmm.
Newt Gingrich shifts from cooperation to obstruction. And since 1995, we've had basically just straight obstruction from Republicans.
Well,
And
in can
while part of that, I think, is just conservatism pushing back against economic changes, but the other part of it, I think, at least from the Republican base, is coming almost entirely against the cultural aspect.
Well, so this is something that's frustrating to me. We discussed this as well. Is conservatism doesn't, at least in the American context, doesn't seem to have a positive vision of the future. All they seem to have is, we are not social progressives. You know,
Yeah,
that seems to be it as far as what they can offer the American people or the world, is we are not leftists.
so I've
And
been a liberal my entire life, and conservatives have pretty much always been disappointments.
but
For the
that's kind
most
of
part, they're just useless. Like they don't.
right.
Their
But
their
but
their leadership strategy is the functional equivalent of erectile dysfunction. They don't do anything.
right. So but that was kind of one of the points that you and I had in that conversation, where it's like, you can't have somebody forwarding a positive vision of the world where all you do is say no. Because basically, just through like erosion, they're eventually going to implement part of their agendas. What you have to do is you have to present an alternative, and
Well,
it doesn't seem like modern
they're
conservatives
operating
are
off
doing that.
Edmund Burke,
Okay. What,
because
the
Edmund Burke
modern
is like,
conservatives?
yeah. It's Edmund Burke is the basically the most important modern conservative philosopher, which basically all the neocons operate off of.
Well, and
Because
I do
conservatism is supposed
too.
to be to stand was it to stand aside the stride of history and
Hmm.
either say slow down or stop. When you
Well,
have that mentality, you're
mhm.
only ever going to lose.
Well, and I'm okay like a Burkean perspective from like using Burke or using conservatism as a filter through which to like filter out the dog shit ideas, I'm okay with that. But my frustration with that is that like there's so many dog shit ideas that need alternatives. They don't need to be filtered. They need to be disposed of
Burned.
and alternative visions proposed. Because basically, if you say like if you talk to so let's say like the ghetto population that Marcuse or whatever wanted to fucking weaponize in order to implement a leftist vision. The vision from the leftists is like, hey, we'll empower you. We will put you into our army. We will basically make it so you can challenge the power structures that have been slowly responsible for destroying your life. We will make you a part of the revolution, and you will have new power like you've never seen before. And then the conservative vision of that is stop being poor. It's like
Basically,
it's
yeah.
it's like sucks to suck and stop being poor, and it's like guys, like maybe we should have something better to say to our fellow citizens. Like I don't know, like maybe we should have something better to offer. And so that's my frustration, is the lack of vision from conservatives when it comes
Yeah,
to
I've spent 20
offering
years
something
trying to get
new.
them to bend.
Right. So, yeah. But this was borderline perfect. So while it was kind of academic and like I don't mind academic at all, but like I just wanted you to kind of like narrativize it, because I think when you have like primary sources or whatever, and I'm not criticizing this. There might be people who want the primary sources because they want to see it for themselves. But I think you're kind of inviting people in chat like Swole to be like, well, this is just one person, and this primary source doesn't mean anything, and blah, 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 blah. Whereas if you just narrativize it and you're like, hey, this is like this person's ideas follows into this person's ideas, this person's ideas follows into this person's ideas,
So
and this is how I see it from a historical narrative perspective, I think that's less easy to challenge, basically, because it's a narrative.
the issue with pure narrative is that when you're basically just dumping Cultural Revolution in their lap, they'll go, "You're full of fucking shit. You have no idea what you're talking about."
Well, but
Like
here's
unless
my
you
thing.
start producing receipts,
Here's my
then they're
thing
just
though.
going to dismiss you.
From my perspective, from my conversations with you, this is where I think it would be super interesting. I don't know if you're down for this or not, but in the future, to have somebody who's saying like, kind of pointing the finger and saying like, "Hey, you're full of shit." I would be interested to see a forcefully productive conversation about that, because I'm fucking sick of like leftists being like, that's not what I mean, that's not what I mean, that's not what I mean. But you see the frame over and over again kind of fall into this frame where it's like, yes, we do want social egalitarianism. Yes, certain segments of the left want to abolish gender or race, and yes, we want to build a counter or co-narrative to the cis heteropatriarchal white majoritarian position, and we want it to challenge the halls of power in order to bring about a more socialist or leftist or egalitarian world. So then you're like, oh, okay, so you're doing that, and they're like, no, 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 that's a conspiracy theory, and it's like, motherfucker, like just own your shit.
Yeah, so let's talk about another thing that they always deny and is really fucking annoying.
Mm,
Anytime you bring up cultural Marxism, the
mhm.
first thing they'll say is that's a neo-Nazi conspiracy theory. But the term cultural Marxism was developed by a critical theorist by the name of Trent Schroyer in the early 1970s,
Yeah,
right?
but Jordan
So
Peterson's a
this is
Nazi because he
literally
uses that term.
correct. This is literally the term is originally created by, I guess, a cultural Marxist, right? And then even if you look at like the Nazis' cultural Bolshevism, Gramsci fits that descriptor almost perfectly.
So yeah, so that would be my thing, is just because a bad person said it doesn't mean it's not true. But what does that mean? So
Well,
for
I'm just
instance,
saying I'm saying descriptively. That's it.
mhm.
Like it's just descriptively accurate.
Oh no, but I'm saying like so for instance, like, okay, the Nazis say the sky is blue. Well, don't
Yeah.
believe the sky's blue. A Nazi said that. Well, if the sky's fucking blue, then they're right. So if it's, hey, you're taking a Marxian formula for like economic classes and you're reapplying them to social relations in order to build a more egalitarian world, which you view as a good thing, supposedly, um, then just own that shit. Just say, yeah, we took the formula of class struggle from Marx and we reapplied it to social issues, and we think that's a good thing. Okay, okay, I think that's a bad thing, and let's fight about it. So that's where my frustration is with this constant like hiding the ball bullshit. It's like, dude, just own it. Just fucking own it, and I won't give a fuck. And then we can fight about why I think your idea is dog shit once you own it. But you have to own it first.
Yeah.
So that's
They
frustrating.
know that. See, they're trying to hide the ball as much as possible because I don't think a sufficient amount of the population is sufficiently radicalized to accept that it's Marxism. So once you rip that mask off, they're gonna have a really difficult time.
Well, okay,
They
so
have to
for
have the
instance,
ball
like
strategically.
Swole, if he hasn't had a fucking stroke by now, I'm sure he's losing his shit right now because he's like, bitch, like Marxism is economic. Like I guarantee you that's
Oh,
like
classical Marxism is economic, and early stage neo Marxism is also very economic, but also cultural.
right.
And then once you get to Mercuse, they're like, these bitches aren't going to throw their revolution. How else can we do it?
Right. Well, okay. So what I would say is, this was kind of introductory. We already knew that we were going to run out of time before we really got our teeth completely sunk into it. But I think we did an excellent introduction. And not just that, but I wanted to ask you. So this is kind of like a pseudo academic historical presentation of some 20th century thought leaders who were narratively potentially responsible for critical theory and are responsible for kind of like leftist social justice ideology as it exists today. And that's kind of what we just did, is like running through the 20th century. That kind of has led us to this academic foundation right now. If there was somebody who promised to behave themselves, or if it was somebody that I could bully and mute, would you be willing to defend these ideas or your perspective on this narrative to somebody who's like, well, this is just, this is just bullshit? Like, would you be willing to say, no, this is what he says here, this is what he says here, this is why I think this? Like, would you be willing to do that in a
Probably, yeah,
non-combative format?
sure.
Okay, cool. Then, what I would say, we'll do that in the future, and then we should do another episode where we kind of talk about like, well, where do we go from here? Because I think one of the frustrations that you and I kind of had was that there is no positive vision of conservatism. There is no future for the right. There's just, we are not the left, and that seems to be all they offer the world, which is super frustrating. And basically, I think a recipe for fucking disaster and defeat. So yeah, that's pretty much it for me. Did you have any? So I want to jump on talking about metamodernism and religion with St. Thomas. Did you have any shout outs, any socials, any primary sources, any secondary sources, anything that you think people who are malding in the audience should check out?
Sure. I'll just throw out my Twitter account. It typically has everything. I'll probably be posting a bunch of the stuff.
All right. And then are you just posting your Twitter in chat, or do you want to shout it out for the people who might just be listening?
Sure. Where is it? Oh, it's at counter rev shw.
Okay. At CounterRevSHW on Twitter. Check them out. I understand that this might have been frustrating for some leftists who want to maul and say that it's all bullshit. But we're going to continue basically not just presenting the narrative, but also having the narrative challenged and pushing back and forth until we can figure what the fuck is going on with all these goddamn leftists. So now we're going to move from the socialist part into the religious part. So I'm fucking excited for this. But thanks for coming on, buddy. Let's do it again soon. I appreciate you, and I hope you have a beautiful night.
Yep, you too. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, buddy. Catch you.
Bye.
All right, give me a second. We'll pull our buddy St. Thomas in here. Um, and I'm gonna check on chat. So I know like normally we do like drama streams and stuff. There's plenty of Ukraine shit to do, but I kind of just wanted like I just kind of phoned it in. I haven't been taking care of my calendar as well as I should have, so I double booked tonight, and I didn't feel like doing a 3-hour show. I just wanted to have this on. So let me share my thoughts with this. So here's my thing. I am sympathetic to the leftists who are like, um, you know, combining all of these authors into like a single coherent like narrative is false because even these people disagree with each other and fight each other, and there's a whole bunch of academics and sub-academics who fight each other about all these ideas all the time. So presenting it as a single meta-narrative is incorrect. I understand that. I also understand the impulse to say, hey, basically like Marxism is an economic philosophy that guided a lot of like revolutionaries of the 19th and 20th century, but it seems like modern progressive leftism is a purely cultural critique and as such has nothing to do with Marxism. I understand you saying that, but if you look at the social structure of there's proletariat, there's bourgeoisie, the proletariat need to rise up and destroy the bourgeoisie and eliminate the class. That way we can live in an egalitarian world. That's the Marxist ideal. That's the future that we're chugging towards, the inevitable future. Well, when you look at race abolitionists or gender abolitionists, and you look at the counterculture hegemon, there's the cis white heteropatriarchal society, which I can say now because this language has seeped into our culture so aggressively that I, a part of the cultural hegemon, am using the language of the counterculture. Okay? So in this way, I would see that it's been successful because even the way that we talk about these narratives has completely changed. The fact that I will talk to people, whether you call it like disparate outcomes or systemic racism, the fact that people can have a conversation about disparate outcomes or systemic racism, I would say is a product of the countercultural hegemon. Because if it was the cultural hegemony, it would be like, well, 1350, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, sucks to suck. Like that's the cultural hegemony. So the countercultural hegemony is like, yo, we got fucked over for 400 years, and here's all the perspectives that you didn't consider. And as a totality, you should consider these narratives when you're creating policy for the future and when we're addressing the policies of the past. There's positives to this, which I think the Burkean conservatives could be a good filter through which to strain social progressivism and strain socialist and communist ideals. But that doesn't mean I want to be a fucking leftist. Doesn't mean I want to be a socialist. Doesn't mean I want to be a communist. And one of my great frustrations is that I feel like right-wingers, people who value hierarchy, religion, spirituality, family, like pseudo-nuclear family, but extended family, mixed economy capitalism, some level of meritocracy, constitutional rights, republicanism, all these things. We've been so fucking lazy with our ability to articulate why our society is the way that it is, that there literally is just the countercultural force seeping into all of our institutions. And then there's a bunch of fucking boomer neoconservatives going, I don't like it. No, stop, please, stop. And like, that's our fucking culture war. Either that, or it's a bunch of fucking millennials who have all been bought by fucking Glenn Beck going, no, stop, please, stop. This is gay. This is trans. That should be a soundbite. But anyways, point being that you have a bunch of people saying no, but then they don't forward a positive agenda besides ethno-nationalism or Christian nationalism and Christian conservatism. And so I think that's a problem because ethno-nationalism seems on its deathbed, to be honest. White ethno-nationalism seems on its deathbed. Christian nationalism seems like it could make a resurgence, but that's still a stopgap. And then Christian conservatism also seems like it's losing its power. So over time, as secularization and globalization increase, Christianity is not going to be a sufficient enough glue to hold America together. So what holds the American right wing together? What holds these principles and ideals together? And I think we have to answer that question if we're going to get anywhere. So I'm going to jump on Twitter. I'm going to get our boy, Mr. Dr. Thomas Concepts on here. We're going to talk about Christianity and metamodernism and religion and all that kind of shit. And let's do it. You ready? What's your Discord? Question mark, exclamation point. Let me check my Discord, see if he's already here. Oh, he's already here. Just kidding. Calling him now. Let's do it. Ready? Let's go.
Hello, hello.
Hey, what's up? Let me.
Not too much. How about you?
I am doing phenomenal. Oh, are you gonna grace me with the camera? You're so.
I am gracing you with a camera. That's exactly what I'm
You are so
doing.
sweet. Thank you. Most people are like fucking avatars and shit. And like, by the way, if you're an avatar, you don't want to self-dox or whatever, there's no problem with that. I love having people on my show and just talking or whatever, but it's so rare to talk to a face that it's actually really nice. So thank you for that.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Then can you introduce the yourself to the folks at home? Can you kind of introduce your takes on what you wanted to talk about tonight? And then also, we had a previous conversation, and we can run for like an hour, more than an hour, just because I took a while to wrap up with the other guy doesn't mean that I'm going to finish you. But the what I was going to say is this was inspired by another conversation. So if you could kind of bring up like what was kind of your thing where you're like, like, you know, what was that moment?
Okay, yeah, absolutely. Hi, I refer to myself as Dr. Concepts or sometimes Dr. Thomas Concepts. I am not a doctor. The doctor is purely theoretical. It's from my theoretical degree in theories and my THD in ideas.
Fair.
I also like to think of myself as a doctor of concepts in that I have encountered a lot of concepts and ideas, and I like them all quite a bit. And I like to get into their inner workings and see how they relate to everything else and how different concepts relate to everything else. And naturally, that led me to religion over time because it's sort of the oldest exercise in that.
What do you,
Um,
yeah,
please.
if you don't mind my asking, what do you believe now? What's your current religious outlook?
Ooh, this is it's a hard question to answer. One of the things that brought me into this conversation was you talking about your own relationship with religious beliefs. It's funny because I've been hanging out on your Discord for a while, and I've had this conversation like 10 times, like what define your religious beliefs, and I hem and haw every single time.
I have a video just for you, but please continue to describe anyways.
So, the best set of words that I found, even though they're not an answer to your question, is a mystic, primarily Christian syncretist. Um,
Oh, you're gonna fucking love this shit. Okay, so can I spurg out already?
yeah, please, please.
So basically, I had someone contact me named Satya Avatara. I will be downloading and releasing the conversation with her, but Satya Avatara, I guess it's like Hindu or something. I don't know. But it means the avatar of truth, and
Okay,
she's basically a Gnostic. This is how I would describe her. She could describe herself however the fuck she wants, but like a Gnostic, mystic syncretist. So
okay,
basically, the way that she views the world is like, hey, we can all tap into the Godhead through like contemplation and meditation and all that shit, and it's actually good to do so, and you can do so on a daily basis, to the point that like you can feel connected at all times to eternity. And as a result, you can kind of have like a better relationship with morality and spirituality and all that kind of stuff. And not only that, but the religion as it exists, while it's a powerful force that still has to be used as a narrative framework through which to view the world, these are ultimately just narratives. And it's important for human beings to realize that even language itself is a construct, and what we're talking about is an eternal force that is separate even from human language. And so the more that you can tap into the gnosis, the knowledge of God, and basically not get sucked into the mythological narratives, but still appreciate them as ways to know yourself and learn humanity and all that kind of shit, the better humanity can become over time. And that, yeah. So
Well,
that was a mind fuck.
what a coincidence, because that's remarkably similar to everything I planned to say. I left one word off of the list, which was Gnostic. Although
Yeah.
it's specifically Gnostic in a Christian context. So, but the thing is, like, I'm also like kind of a Buddhist. I'm more of a Taoist. If I were in some scenario, like gun to my head type scenario where it's pick one forever, I'd go with Taoist immediately.
Well, and so for those for people who are not as familiar with the terms or whatever,
Right.
you know, so Taoist would be the unity of all things.
Yes.
Um,
A Chinese religions like almost philosophy, almost mystic religion. The primary scripture is called the Tao Te Ching, um, and essentially explaining the divine as like the continuity of all things together, a balancing of energies, good and bad, that is always in a state of pursuing balance with the other, so that what we typically think of as like good, which is wholly separate from evil, their symbol is the yin yang. So there's the two like larger sort of fish shaped portions, and then there's a little dot of the opposite color in each. Uh, what Taoism suggests is that everything, like, there is no separation between good and bad. There is no separation between you and anyone else or the universe. No meaningful separation, at least. That all that is part of a grand continuum that you just sort of like ride on like a wave.
you know what fucked me up? So talking to Satya Avatar or whatever. So I was, you know, I deal with like a lot of shit. And one of the things that I dealt with was like cosmology, like not the shitty one, like, you know, where I'm an Aries, that means I like to shoplift. But like the one where it's like you're actually dealing with like the physical elements of the world. And
Right.
so what fucked me up about talking to her was like we were talking about like, oh well, Big Bang emanating from a singularity. We don't know where that singularity came from. There's black holes, suck everything back into it. You know, we could be on a flat sheet of paper, but that doesn't seem to make sense. And also from like an astronomical or astrological perspective, everything I'm saying can be true. But the way that she viewed it is like eternity is eternity. We all emanate from something. We're all going back to something. This is the alpha and the omega, the beginning and the end. It's also Taoism, so it's the unity of all things. And then while life isn't quite an illusion because we are like physically separated,
Hmm.
the physical separation that we're undergoing right now is a temporary existence of the universe understanding itself or trying to understand itself and have all these experiences, but by connecting to the eternal, we can kind of like undo some of the anxiety of existence, and also through gnosis kind of just like accept the world as it is instead of trying to force it to be something else, and then recognizing the limitations of language and human construction like religion. We can basically like, you know, afterlife, no afterlife, doesn't matter. We're still a part of the eternal oneness of the existence of the world. So I don't know where to go from there because frankly, like I was completely sober and I was on an acid trip. So that was
Well, there, like, I suppose my perspective would be a little bit different in one way. So there's this trouble you run into with immaterial religions, Gnosticism, Taoism, Buddhism to a significant extent, and granted, I guess I caught a bit of the talk earlier. It was a great lead up to this, by the way. I guess we're pissing everybody off tonight because I'm sure I've already pissed plenty of people who
oh fuck
practice these
them,
religions more. No, I'm
fucking
not.
no,
I'm
no,
not
no.
worried about it.
I want to
But
say fuck them to their face real quick. Please keep your rant in your head. If you can't deal with religious concepts because you're like, oh, this is all voodoo, fuck you. Like seriously, you're gonna spend fucking 80 years on this goddamn planet and you're not gonna contemplate anything besides material reality. Fuck you, you boring sack of shit. Anyways,
well,
sorry. Please continue.
no. Please add in. We might get a little bit of a spin at a certain point that'll get some of the pure materialists in as well, but maybe we'll get to it.
Mhm.
So, also, by the way, chat, I know usually I am one of you. Tonight I am not, and I am not reading you. So if you're trying to tell me things or arguing with me, it is passing right into the void. Um, so there's a problem with the immaterial religions, or like the immaterially focused religions sometimes, where especially when the goal is to not incarnate, not participate in the physical world, and it's actually a problem that the Gnostics had, other than being hunted by the early Christian church, which had become an arm of the power structure of the Roman Empire, but we can get to that later too.
Bunch of fucking heretics. No,
Um,
yeah.
the problem is Gnostics don't breed. For a religious philosophy to completely deny material sensation to the point where people aren't even having sex within wedlock, they're not getting married in the first place because a lot of the older Gnostics, and there's a lot of different types of Gnostics for the record. Um, a lot of them would literally just cloister off from the world, believing that the surest path of salvation was to deny every material aspect of it. And then you sort of see, in a weird way, I think, you see that idea sort of reincarnate in Puritan America. When the Puritans come to the United States, they come with a completely denialist Christianity, and I think one that still like has a ghost in our culture in some way. So while I can't wait to watch that video. I really dug everything
Oh,
that you related from her perspective.
oh,
Uh,
I think we're gonna lose at least 100 subscribers.
okay, all right, absolutely. Let's
Because
go.
basically, like, she's tripping out, and then I'm just on her, like on every branch. I'm like, yep. That makes sense. That makes sense. Yep. Okay. What about this? What about this? And so, that's where for me, I don't give a fuck because basically for me that connection to the universe that can kind of, I don't want to say eliminate anxiety, but it can kind of make you feel like, oh, I get this, or even if I don't get it, I have a connection to this that feels deeper than everything else, so I can try to figure everything else out. That's awesome. And then the denialist Gnostic. So I kind of want to explain this for Chad if they're not tracking the conversation. Gnostic. So I think gnosis means to know, and it would basically be specifically knowledge of God. So it would be to have like some kind of like mystic connection to the foundational creator of the universe, which you can just kind of say, well, there's a beginning and an end, and we're connected to it because we're part of the creation and blah 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 blah. But gnosis, on the other hand, I think I got like secondhand gnosis from Satya, because she's just so like passively connected to that shit that I was like, oh, I can borderline feel this, like I can feel this myself, the way that she must perceive the world. and perceive that connection to the eternal. So I'll kind of like do the same thing, and then I've been kind of repeating mantras myself to try to keep that connection.
Well,
But
that's please. No, please.
oh well, so I was gonna say, I think there's a lot of material denial of anything. And by the way, like you can have a purely material understanding of this phenomena, which is basically like there was a singularity, everything was connected all at one time. The definition of separate things didn't exist because literally everything was physically connected. Now we're physically disconnected through a physical phenomena that we don't understand, which is basically the Big Bang. And so, regardless of whether or not you experience sensation again after you die, regardless of whether or not there's an afterlife, you're still a fractal of the eternal. So, just accept that fact and enjoy your existence as a fractal of the eternal. So, I love that shit because that like put together so many different concepts for me that I had thought of logically separately, but I hadn't like incorporated into a total vision of the world. And so this is almost like knowing God without there needing to be an afterlife, knowing purpose or connection to the eternal with while still acknowledging suffering as a part of existence, knowing a lot of things that basically seem shitty. Like I mean, God, like suffering sucks. But I also wanted to acknowledge something else while still tripping balls. So the the other thing that you kind of said is there's a Gnostic temptation to disconnect or to just become like woo, you know, like I know God's vision for the world because I'm so connected to him that now I understand deeper foundational truths of the universe. Let me go do some mushrooms. I'm going to write down some shit in a book, and then everybody needs to start following that because I have a better connection to God than anybody else. And so I asked Satya, like, how do you disconnect that? Because history has so many fucking people that like basically did that, where they had like a Gnostic connection. They assumed that they were like the Messiah. They wrote down some shit because they were like looking spatially weird out into the universe. People believed their vision of the world. And then they went and did some horrific shit. Like whether you're talking about, I don't want to talk shit about everybody's messiahs, but the point is that there's lots of messiahs who did some nefarious shit. So how do you disconnect that? And she was basically like, well, you know, if they fucked up, then they kind of, you know, that's not the real connection. And I'm like, all right, that's a little bit convenient. Like you can't.
Okay.
So how do you parse that out?
Okay, absolutely. I've got a response to that directly, and I've got another way to think of what we were just talking about. So first, my response to that directly is it's still a little bit wishy-washy, but I think it's a little bit stronger. I think that any human connection with the divine will be permanently tainted by our third dimensional meat brains.
Thank you. That's what I said. Sorry, continue.
No problem. So, and it works perfectly into another way to think about it. Like, so oneness and then separation, and we can put it in Big Bang terms for the filthy secularists in the audience. What if that separation was an illusion that we projected onto what happened because of our, let's say, fleshy nature? What if everything was all one all the time, and simply in this configuration of energy and matter, beings made of stuff, but somehow endowed with consciousness, which is another entirely separate conversation, I should have said. What if the fact that we are constrained in material is the only reason that we see anything as separate, and everything is one all the time, always? The way that, like, if you looked at
fuck
any
you, buddy. Now you're mind fucking me.
Well, good. Then I did my job. I was worried I was underprepared.
Yeah.
So, like a tapestry. a tapestry is made of an uncountable number of individual threads, but if you looked at any one of the threads, you wouldn't understand the tapestry. Or you could say like painting or drawing. A drawing is made of innumerable individual strokes of a pencil or whatever. You can't look at any one and determine what the whole is, but other than to say that it's a hollow reflection of the whole. Or to go back to the tapestry metaphor, because I like it better actually. What if you looked at like the back of the tapestry where none of the color is and everything looks all like weird and inverted, and you're seeing the spots where the thread had to like loop back on itself for some reason. To create the beautiful total picture on one side, it has to be made of all of these like little parts that are kind of ugly when you look at them. If no one's seen the tapestry before, this metaphor is really falling flat.
No, I fucking love it. Listen, I'm cultured, okay? I've seen the Bayeux Tapestry. I've seen a bunch of
Okay.
French motherfuckers commemorate a battle where they like slaughtered a bunch of fucking English motherfuckers, or vice versa. I forget. And they basically like, in order to dunk on the losing team, they made like a mile-long fucking tapestry of the battle, and they're like, fuck you, pussies. We're gonna like commemorate this shit in rope.
So, so to take the tapestry metaphor and to push it a little bit further, there's a Bible quote that just came to mind that players of Civilization 5 probably know really well. Shall the clay saith to him that fashioneth it, what makest thou? Meaning, why is it that you, as an ape, think that you are either capable of, or deserve to, or ought to understand the total of everything that is?
Because we
Why?
almost seem capable of it.
Yeah. Okay.
That's what's
So
frustrating. We're
Okay,
almost capable of it.
so now you're getting into what I will align with Gnostic mythology as like each one of us is a little slice of God. A lot of times with like New Age religions, you'll run into the situation where people say like, "Oh, like you're God and I'm God. We're all God." No, you're like
Fractal.
God is the thing that's always bigger than everything else. As soon as you can name a thing that's not quite God, to put it in Taoist terms, the Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao.
Ooh,
Um,
fuck you. All right. We should have
the
gotten stoned for this one.
Yeah, we can next time. So the like
The
by
Tao that can be described as not the eternal Tao.
correct,
Oh,
the moment that your cognition can latch onto something, it is no longer infinite. You, with your perception, have made it into a particular thing, and God or the Tao or Ein Sof, if we want to use Kabbalah, or the totality of everything that is all at once, which, by the way, is the only proper way to think about God.
Hmm.
Um, the like if you can maybe grasp onto a part of it, and you can maybe look at it a part of it in particular, but if you can grasp it, it is not the thing that you're looking for, because it by the way that we interact with the world, just to be living beings on this earth, we have to separate things into categories and make up uses for them, and we have to know what wolves are, for example. And if we really are all one, then if we can't separate what the wolves are, the wolves will eat us, which like might be cool in a grand cosmic sense. Maybe it's not that big of a deal,
Not
but
cool
yet
on an individual level.
precisely. So we're still, for some reason, we are moved to persist, which is to bring it back to like the Gnostics, like I'm thinking of like the early Gnostics, like the ones that like voiced
Fasted themselves to
opposition.
death.
Yeah, basically. So
There's actually a Game
please,
of Thrones story, if you'll allow me to schizo
please,
post.
please.
So there's a Game of Thrones story. They talk about like I read some of the back lore. But basically, there was somebody who was like pious because his family was so like fucked up that he was like, I'm gonna be religious. And at first, everybody was like, oh shit, that's base because like he's religious and he's gonna save everybody and he's doing all these awesome things and he's the king. So he's gonna implement like all this like awesome like religious shit into the kingdom. So like the poor people got a good shake, the church got a good shake, like all that kind of stuff. But then this dude was so connected to religion and so abhorrent of the exterior world that his kingdom started getting ripped up and people were like dying
Yeah.
left, right, and center. And he was like, well, what the fuck does it matter? Because like all that matters is like, worship of the gods and shit. And they were like, hey, you got to get married because we need to do like political alliances in order to make sure that we can save the kingdom. And he's like, who gives a fuck? And so like ultimately he ended up like, getting killed or whatever. But the point being that like you can become so entranced with the like Gnostic spiritualism that you ignore reality itself, and then that doesn't seem to be an answer either. And if anything, I wanted to say this to you when you first brought it up. That feels like a rebuke of the gift you were given, because
Precisely.
you were given the gift of separation and life and existence and specific experience. So if you were given the gift of specific experience, then there should be something that can be learned from that specific experience. So to say, oh, mindless oblivion or eternal oneness with the Godhead, I don't care. I want to like resume or subsume myself into the eternal. It's a rejection of the gift of specific experience. And
Precisely.
so that's where like, why not like just go into a meditative chamber and do fucking like I forget what the new like slightly euphoric weed is, Delta 8. Like do Delta 8 and just like fucking meditate and do yoga every day. Why not do that? It's because you're rejecting the specific experience that you were given.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's also a phrase, I caught up on some of your content that would pertain to this conversation and prep for this conversation. So I'm going to use a phrase that you used. What's the rush?
Mm-hmm.
Was anyone ever under the impression that they weren't going to die one day?
Right. Yeah.
Was anyone ever under the impression that material existence would cease, or would not cease, rather? So, which sort of like leads me to this question, which is ideally the question that every religion is asking all the time. Sorry, real quick, since we're in the Gnostic frame, I gotta tell you about like the basic mythology, which hasn't been what we're focusing on, and that's fine, but it's got a really cool one.
Hmm.
So at least like within the Christian context, and there's a lot of Gnostic sects. So small cults of Gnosticism were all over the Mediterranean, and some of them interacted with Judaism, some of them interacted with Greek religion, some of them interacted with Roman religion, Christianity, etc. So just a real quick overview. What if, and God, it's about to get wild. Sorry. What if the God that we think of as God when we read the Bible, Jehovah or Yahweh, although I might be able to make a case that Jehovah and Yahweh are two distinct characters, but that's a different conversation. What if that God wasn't the God that births Jesus Christ? What if it was a different, lesser God, not necessarily inherently evil? So that's one base idea I just want to throw out there. But the actual formative Gnostic mythology is like, what if the creator of material were not the good guy?
Oh fuck.
So
That's bad.
so right. So to illuminate on where the like both of us are going, like, oh, why would you come to this conclusion to deny the material? Well, it's kind of in the mythology. So when God made everything, including a thing that could not perceive God in any way whatsoever. And that thing, in absence of God, I reasonably determines that it is God. And looks at all of creation and decides that it wants its own version of it. And because it cannot build it out of spirit, so there's like real existence, which is kind of like the Platonic world of forms, where like everything is like everything is the idea of itself. What if that God decided to make a facsimile of what's real out of stuff?
Ooh, the simulation.
Precisely. Precisely. And I'm working on an article in which I use the Matrix to explain Gnosticism. Because there's some one-to-one parallels, especially in the first movie. So what if you were trapped here against your will? What we think of hell isn't real. Actually, this is hell, and you got fucked. But it's not your fault. A little piece of the divine was stolen and crammed into a body made of mud, and that's you. And I'm not saying I believe that, but just to
Yeah,
give
just
the Gnostics
mind fuck. It's like existence was a mistake.
just to give them their proper shrift, if you look at Genesis in even a current Bible, and I've got a lot to say about how many like edits the Bible has had over time, but another separate conversation. If you look at the Bible, there's actually two creation stories in Genesis, two of them. In the first, God speaks, and then everything is, including us. In the second, God fashions us out of mud. God fashions us out of stuff. That's where the from dust you came and dust you shall return. It's all from that like second creation story in Genesis. That's about like 10. It's like 10 chapters further along, I think. Might be 20. Where in the second creation story, there's a lot more specifics and a lot more mechanics to like how we got here. In the first one, God's just like everything is now. In the second, it seems like work had to be done. So when the Gnostics deny all of the material, they do it in rebellion to what they believe is a jailer.
Ooh, fuck you. Wow.
So, which leads us to what we're actually trying to talk about and what pertains to the mission, and to like sort of answer part of a question that I skipped over earlier. Like one of the reasons I wanted to have this conversation is like I've been a sense of mission for what influence I want to have on the world has been forming in me for a long time. And then like I start watching this internet stuff, and I find that your mission coincides with a lot of aspects of my own. And then it was an episode of Mask Off where you were talking about like religion as a form of societal cohesion, and you sort of like spoke a lot of your thoughts that were similar to mine. So now I'm here.
Nice. Oh, it's beautiful.
So, what do we do with that? Well, there was another option that did not occur to the Gnostics because probably they were bound up in their mythological story. Which again, I think it's cool. I'm receptive to it. But what if you could instead make the world as close to heaven as you possibly could? So even if this is hell, there's no denying that we have some like literal, physical, tangible influence over the structure of this world. We run this world. What if we could design the world such that it no longer felt like hell anyway? And then you get to the Christian intersection with Gnostic ideas, because Thomas comes along, my absolute favorite.
Right?
Yes, Doubting Thomas comes along, Didymus Judas Thomas, comes along and he writes his own gospel that nobody knows about. And nobody really knew about until the 50s when it was discovered in an underwater cave in Jordan, hidden beneath some rocks, along with a bunch of other ancient
Shut the
scriptures.
fuck up.
Yeah, buckle up and feel free
Doubting
to...
Thomas wrote a scripture, and a copy of it was found in the 1950s.
Dated to its original writing. Or like relatively within its original writing.
Carbon dated or age dated to approximately a few decades
within 20 years of the death of Christ.
Jesus fucking Christ. Are you serious?
Indeed. Exactly, Jesus fucking Christ. I am serious. You might have heard of the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Yes.
That's what I'm talking about, the Dead Sea Scrolls. They were found.
Oh, Doubting Thomas wrote a forgotten gospel. Thomas was my favorite. Okay, hold on. Let me catch some people up on the mythos, because they're probably more into Marvel or DC characters than fucking disciples of Christ. Okay, so there's basically there's all the disciples, right? And everybody has their favorite. Who was Judas was the fucking traitor. Pretty much everybody remembers him. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they write the fucking accepted gospels, the 4 gospels. And I forget, but in all those gospels, they're like, oh, somebody went to the tomb and Jesus wasn't there, so Jesus came back and all that kind of shit. And Thomas
Mary, actually.
Yeah,
Mary was the first to witness the empty tomb.
Yeah, so Thomas, being the dickhole he is, because he's similar to me, he's like, fuck you, Pixar, it didn't happen. And so basically what happens is Jesus comes back and reveals himself to Thomas. He puts his fingers in the wounds and all that kind of shit, and he says, oh wow, I believe now. And Jesus says, well, you believe because you've seen, but blessed are those who haven't seen and yet still believe. And so the reason why I hate that passage is because it's like, hey, you got doubts? Shut the fuck up. Just believe me, motherfucker. Like this shit happened. So I always saw Thomas as a character that I identified with. So I'm super curious to know what his gospel is all about. That is super interesting to me.
Sorry, I had to mute to cough from laughing so much.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I can kind of rescue your opinion of Thomas a little bit, because there's every reason to doubt that Thomas ever recanted his position about the resurrection of Christ. It's also worth noting that in at least a few retellings, Christ is resurrected sort of as a hologram, like Christ is back, and then there
the
you
simulation.
go.
Right. The simulation.
No, I mean a spirit,
Yeah.
like a ghost made of light, basically. And I don't.
Good for him.
Right. Why would you come back to flesh? What a strange choice.
Because Doubting Thomas's ass had to fucking doubt and shit, so he's got to be like, yo, bro, I can fucking manipulate reality how I want. I'm God, bitch. That's
precisely, but Thomas was also the beloved disciple. He was Jesus's favorite, and even in the regular Bible that doesn't include his gospel, although they totally had a copy when they were writing it, they decided not to include it. I say writing it. I mean, so the early Christian church is really fascinating because, especially because of its intersection with power with the Roman Empire, because there were 10,000 different Christianities until Constantine says, no, everybody meet, pick one.
Right.
Which
he's hated for, but he's also revered for.
Yeah, there's ups and downs to the decision. There's no getting around that. But so Thomas is when Christ comes down from the transfiguration. He goes up to the top of the mountain. Everyone at the bottom of the mountain sees a flash of light that's blinding to them. Christ comes back down, and he is now, and everyone can tell that he's different. He's essentially reached full ascension, full combination with the divine essence.
Yeah, Jedi Ghost. Got it.
Precisely. Good enough, at least.
Well, no, like I'm sure the Jedi actually stole, I'm sure George Lucas obviously stole that shit. You know what I'm saying?
Well,
Nothing's original.
Right. It's not even theft at this point. I mean, the same story is being told over and over since like 10,000 years ago. So, um, well, that's Joseph Campbell with like the hero's journey and everything. But anyway, so Christ comes down from the mount and he walks away from everybody but like Thomas. He brings Thomas with him. And like he and Thomas just like stand around and talk for a little while, and everybody else is like, "What the fuck is going on?"
Mm.
And finally, they're done, and Thomas comes back to the group, and they say, "Like, what did he say?" And Thomas says, "If I told you, you'd stone me to death right now. I can't tell you."
Mm.
And that's within the standard like scriptural documentation. Like, I'm not even reaching into the Apocrypha or the more like. It's so wishy-washy. It might as well be conspiracy at this point, but I don't care. Um, doubting though he may have been, he was still the beloved disciple, and and if you look at the totality of the story, it seems like he had the best grasp on what Christ was up to. So the Gospel of Thomas is a sayings gospel. There's like story gospels and there's like saying gospels. So if you look at the ones in the Bible that we all have, it's like they're sort of different in that like one focuses on like things that Jesus said. That's where we get all the like the parables and
He said,
the
yeah. And it kind of gets
absolutely
repetitive almost, yeah.
right, absolutely. The Gospel of Thomas has a few that are similar, like more than a few that are similar. Certainly enough to like give you the impression that you're talking about the same man, Jesus. But there's also a lot of stuff in it that the rest of the Gospels don't include at all. And one I thought of to pick right ahead of time, which works into what we're talking about. It's the second to last one out of 114 sayings. This is 113. His disciples said to him, "When will the kingdom come?" Jesus said, "It will not come by waiting for it. It will not be a matter of saying, 'Here it is,' or 'There it is.' Rather, the kingdom of the Father is spread out upon the earth, and men do not see it." So,
No,
in
Christendom.
well, there's actually I've got a couple of others that like seem to critique the later church in like a weird prescient way, but we'll get to it
Oh
eventually.
man, I love heresy. I love shit that would like absolutely get us fucking murdered like a few hundred years ago. Fuck yeah, love it.
I also I want to say I had planned to say this, and I say this in almost every conversation I have like this. I want to clarify for the audience, like for the record, I am literally a heretic.
Yeah.
If they start like I defend
Like
religion a
the
lot.
Christian nationalists would be like, fuck this guy. They'd be like,
Yeah,
this.
I'm sure they're like that right now.
Yeah.
um, the thing is, if they start burning witches again, I am very near the top of that list.
Yo, that's why I'm not gonna lie. This is why trad cats drive me fucking crazy. Because I'm like, you're literally advocating for the hierarchical, dogmatic belief in things that don't make sense, that made the world a worse place for like prolonged periods of time, instead of advocating for the better parts of the religion, which are
Right.
basically like gnosis, connection to God, morality, empathy, you know, all that shit. Anyways, so
The basic sacred nature of existing in itself.
fucking
Um,
Catholics. Can we have like a Gnostic purge of fucking dogmatic fucking dickhead? Like can it be the opposite instead? Like the mystics like purge the dogmatists? Is that a thing?
well, I think that's
Probably not
precisely
because
what's.
they think it's against it. Yeah, I know. It's fine. Whatever.
No, I actually think that's exactly what's already happening.
What? Fuck you.
So, like that's fine. I will remember to come back to this. Let's jump forward because this is super important. What I believe is happening is that as organized, dogmatic, Peterson would say calcified religion it wanes, what you see is a lot of people turning to traditional forms of spirituality, really old forms of spirituality. You've got the neo-pagans, you've got crystal ladies, you've
Right.
got all these like new age religions. You've got people doing revivals of like say like Native American religions, or if you're listening, in Canadian First Nation religions.
Hmm.
Um, and I see that as like the natural response to the void of religion. So in part, what I wanted to talk about is like, all right, the religions are collapsing. What do we do? And like part of my answer is I don't think we have to do that much, really.
Whoa.
I think it's kind of all going about the course that it was set upon in the first place.
Well, I mean, when you're one with everything, I mean, you can kind of say that.
Yeah, it's certainly easy enough for me to say that.
No, but I appreciate it because it makes it a little bit more alarmist. I know Endernax, if he's in the fucking chat, he's probably shitting blood. But I do understand and kind of appreciate what you're saying, which is basically like even for me, what's happened is the dogmatism is impossible anymore. It's not even if I wanted it to be possible, it's not possible. And I have to wonder, in the past, how much were some people just going through the motion, and they were more connected to like the spiritual shit, and they were just like, hey, just ignore that dogmatic shit, just go with the spiritual shit. Like, I wonder how many people were like that, because it seems like dogmatism has been its own. It's killed itself basically.
Yeah. And
'Cause-
that's precisely what I believe happens. I don't think it's the fault of people for not participating in religions. I think it's the fault of religions for failing to produce significant revelatory experience such that people follow them.
Wow. That's actually like I know I said that super chill, but that's actually deeply heretical, but also kind of beautiful, and also kind of opens up a bunch of new opportunities.
That's precisely what I see it as. I see it as a moment of new opportunity. And also, like, to be clear,
Chaos is a ladder.
I most of my debates, like actual debates, have been with anti-theists, in which, like, by the nature of the debate, I find myself defending religion in itself more than a little bit. And I don't mean to shit on the concept of organized religion in itself. Like, all the like there are benefits, but for the sake of a little bit of background, like, I wasn't really raised in religion other than, like, like general American Christianity. Like, even if your family doesn't go to church, you know who Jesus is, and you know some basic Christian tenets just by being American.
Yeah, like a
Um,
creaster.
right. So when I came to like actual, like genuine belief, like belief that I act out, that I research, that I attempted to deepen my understanding of, that I attempt to like participate in some form of worship of, etc., like all of that was completely on my own. So I get to have this really like unique perspective, free of indoctrination, other than what I already mentioned. Um, and it puts me in a really interesting position when I debate, say, like anti-theists who want to do away with any sort of spiritual thought whatsoever, thinking that we lose more than we gain from having it.
Oh, I hate those fucks. Oh my
Yeah,
god.
I'm obligated not to hate them, but they do irritate me. um,
No, but like I seriously, like, it's I think it's one thing to say this doesn't have value to me, or I don't see the logic in it, or some shit like that. I think understandable, especially considering like the dogmatism of previous religions. But to say like I missed all of it. I miss the moral messaging. I miss the connection to the divine. I miss the contemplation of the spiritual. I miss the contemplation of the moral. I missed everything. Like, you missed a fucking lot, dude. Like, you weren't paying attention. Either
Right.
that or I'm going to meme a little bit, but like, actually, I'm
Please.
not even going to meme. I'm just going to say somebody in a position of religious power abused you to the point that you can't consider anything they say anymore. Like, when somebody's like a rabid anti-theist, I'm assuming somebody in a position of religious power actually used that power to abuse them, and that's where they're coming back very viscerally.
Right, or they came from like a family that was suppressively religious.
Right.
Even if it weren't like a clergy person involved or anything
Mhm.
like that. That's what I found too. I actually went on a Prime Kai panel.
Yeah, he's pretty aggressive about that shit.
It was a long while ago. It was like my first time doing anything like this. This has been excellent, by the way. Way more fun for me than a panel.
Yeah.
Doobie yelled at me. No, he didn't.
Well,
He's a
if it
nice
makes you
guy.
feel better, I yelled at Doobie all the time.
No. No. The funny thing is, like I got there late, so like after stream when everyone was just hanging out and talking, like I got to have like a better, deeper conversation with him. Like really, really cool dude, really understanding dude, just very forceful dude.
Yeah,
Um,
a little bit.
so quick shout out to Doobie, I guess. So anyway, I went on a panel and I had a moment of genuine realization while I was on that panel as like everyone who disagreed with me relayed what they had to say. And this has been true every other single time I've had a conversation like this, like, oh, this hurt you.
Right.
And like I get that. And so I feel some urge to like point the finger at like the religions to the extent that like, well, if this stuff is going to happen, then naturally people are going to walk away from you when you don't have the societal power that you once had.
Right.
So that when I
Because
say like
you're
this is
abusing,
natural,
yeah, you abuse the authority through which you should have been administering like justice, knowledge, wisdom, gnosis, spirituality, moral contemplation, and you used it to basically just further your own fucking ego. Which like I think that's one of the most frustrating things is watching ego get wrapped up in shit. Literally, so I went to I have an extended family member who runs a literally a home for disabled people. Made it their life's work to work 3 jobs to provide this like home for disabled people. Like it's kind of like you have a kid who is like disabled, drop them off, no questions, no concerns. They'll take the kid and they'll raise him for life. Like, and the community has come together enough that they can basically fund this project. So these people dedicated their lives to it. The patriarch dies, go to the funeral, and then like the priest is like yelling at the crowd, like not yelling, but might as well have been basically yelling at people like, "Hey, stop crying. He's in heaven now, like sipping sweet tea with Jesus on a fucking balcony." And it's like, bro, like that, like number one, that's probably a metaphor. Number two,
right?
these people lost their patriarch. Like, don't be a dick just because like you're in a position of power. And like sorry, that just popped in my head as soon as you were talking about like everybody there is so devout that they're not gonna care about that. But for me, I was like, what a fucked up thing to say to people who just lost their patriarch.
Like on one hand, because I get the urge to steel man the religious position every time. I can't help myself. Like on one hand, I think there is some value in being like, only us are sad right now. This guy's fine.
Right.
Like don't be sad for him. Be sad he's gone. But
Mm-hmm.
like we're the only people suffering right now.
And maybe if he'd said that shit, I would have been like, all right, but like that's not how that came
No,
across.
I agree with
that
you. Great. Like
that
I
it came across as finger wagging at people for not being sufficiently
dour.
believers because they were too dour.
Okay.
They were too dour. They should have been celebrating that this dude was dead because
Okay.
now he's with Jesus, sipping on sweet tea, and basically everybody crying is really just an indication that they don't believe hard enough. And so that's where it was
Yeah,
like, yo, like,
yeah.
yeah,
That is an
heaven's
unfortunate
probably
display.
a metaphor, bro beans.
And even if it's not, that was still the wrong thing to say. Like
Well,
even if it is not a metaphor, like there's still like what, like 50 hurt people in a room who it's literally your job as the priest, the clergy, the functionary to comfort.
well, so yeah, so you said that where you're like, well, I don't think it's a metaphor. So I am of two minds of this, like afterlife, basically. Um, on one hand, I feel like the material universe is so complex that I can't imagine an afterlife. And then on the other hand, I have a friend who died, literally broke his neck in a car accident. And he said that he handed an EMT his cigarettes and then he coded, and he wasn't even like a believer. Like he was
Hmm.
just like a vaguely good dude. And basically he described dying like going into like he still had a sense of self, like he was him. But it was kind of like going to sleep in a or not going to sleep, but being in like a giant warm bath. Like that's the way that he described it, and kind of like this overwhelming sense of like love and peace and collapse and it being okay and like all that kind of shit.
Hmm.
And I know that like secular people, they like to say like, oh well, that's just like the neurochemicals. No offense, but like the human brain is so complex that it dumps everything. So if people were like, I was terrified and I pooped my pants and I had the sense of peace and I was scared and I was anxious, like if they said like they experienced like every emotion all at one time, then I'd be like, okay, that's like the human brain dumping every neurological chemical all at once because it can no longer contain itself. But
Why would
saying
it be
like,
so nice?
yeah, like what? Yeah, I've asked myself that. I was like, why would what evolutionary process would develop to help living creatures transition into death? You know what I'm saying?
Okay.
Like what? Like how does that evolution start? And then what's the biological advantage? Because wouldn't all the dead ones like wouldn't they be dead? You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like
What to clarify where I'm at, I'm not certain that heaven works that way. I mean, even like imagining what disembodied consciousness would be like is really, really hard because our consciousness is embodied. Everything
right.
about the conscious experience is derived from having a physical form made out of with neurons. Um, but I try I have tried to forge a theology in which the answer to that question doesn't matter to me today.
Right.
I hopefully. Um I like I'm willing to believe that like in what is a soul, but I'm also not entirely sure that what we think of as the self is the soul, because like
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't it be in some way affected by the meat brain? And
Right.
like the thing that we would define as the soul wouldn't have the aspects of the meat to it. It's tricky. We could hack through that particular sticky piece of theology at another time if we like. But yeah, but just to be clear, I guess I'm saying like I think it is cool to think that people who are dead are better off than we are, so long as that does not cause us to rush to the grave.
Well,
Because
so
if
that's what I was
we
going to ask. Why do biological organisms avoid death so aggressively if being dead is better than being alive?
Oh, that is a hard why. It's not one I've got a good answer for, other than, and it's the answer is kind of a cop out, other than to say like because we're supposed to be alive while we're alive. Like I can make a pitch that it's works better this way, because if we care about the time that we have, we'll use it better or something like that, or we'll build a better world that people won't be excited to leave
Yeah,
or something
so
like that.
can I tell you? So
Please.
I am of the opinion that it could be like neurochemicals. As dismissive as I was, it could be neurochemicals that like humans experience and this, that, the other, or whatever. But I think that being dead and pass on from existence, even if you look at like scripture, like the resurrection is not supposed to be instantaneous. You know what I'm saying? Even from like a Christian perspective, you're supposed to die first, right? So, I feel like unconsciousness could probably be like sleep unconsciousness, dreamless sleep. That could probably be very similar to death, and it can almost feel jarring when you wake back up, where you're like, ah, shit, my body hurts. You're like, fuck, like, why am I awake? I want to stay unconscious. But then, like, once you start moving, it feels good, or at least you want to be productive and connected and all that kind of stuff. But I feel like unconsciousness can almost be attractive, kind of like dreamless sleep, but comfortable because it's painless and all that kind of stuff. So I think that's a potential for what happens to you when you die. But like I said, I met that one guy who had an afterlife, and there seems to be some afterlife stories from other people, and it also seems that like people talk about the tunnel and the light and seeing relatives and being greeted by a messenger figure and all that kind of stuff. And the stories seem consistent enough that there seems to be a story for people that pass on. So, and what I mean by that is like, heart patients or car accident patients who have passed on and then were resuscitated.
Right, totally.
And so, basically, like, I'm of two minds. Like, both of those could exist simultaneously. One of them could be true. One of them could be true. I have no fucking idea. But the point is that kind of doesn't matter because, like you said, we're stuck on this plane. We are separated from the oneness of God, the oneness of creation, whatever you want to call it. And we know that we have this plane. We know that we have this time. We know that we have this body, which means that it's better, worse, unconscious God, conscious God, doesn't matter. We've been given a gift, and so we should use that gift as best we can. And so that's what I kind of love about the Gnostic perspective that Sonia Avatara was kind of like advocating for, where it's like, hey, these are stories and frames and narratives and myths that humans have created, but like ultimately even language itself is a creation of narrative. So we have to acknowledge that these are our creations, but there's something real beyond that we're just like clamoring to understand. And as long as you acknowledge the real thing that's beyond that, then that's what you're really trying to connect to. You're not trying to connect to the myth. The myth is a vehicle to connect to the real thing. So if you need the vehicle, or if you're in a vehicle and it's comfortable and it gets you where you need to go, then do that. But if it's if it's bullshit and you're like, this is a narrative structure, I hate it, fuck this, then that's kind of where we need something new, and that something new would be accepting, at least for me anyways, that a lot of the world's religions are narrative and linguistic vehicles for people to understand the nature of reality and morality. And that's kind of where I landed, where like Gnostic connection to the font of creation without some expectation of afterlife or judgment or whatever. Like maybe that's real, maybe it's not. I don't fucking know. But that connection is a lot more important than the narrative, I guess.
Right. And that actually that falls pretty well under a frame of like Unitarian Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
But
So why do Unitarians suck so bad?
it's because they spend too much money on their churches.
I was gonna say they smoke too much weed, but whatever.
um, well, I don't. I don't know.
I like weed.
Christianity was invented to be practiced in the sewers, so I don't know why we're doing it in stadiums.
Whoa! Had that in your back pocket, huh? Shit.
That came to me just now, believe it or not.
That is a great fucking saying. And it's but that's like the argument, right, between the Catholics and the Protestants is like the Catholics are saying hey, you're worshiping the fountain of creation or the font of creation. You need to create like structures worthy of him. And then the Protestants say he's the fucking font of creation. Why would he be impressed by a fucking pretty building? Like, you fucking dumbass. And so so I actually literally see both narratives because like I've seen on one hand yeah, what is God going to be impressed by a pretty building? No. Who gives a shit? On the other hand, humans are, so
I'd like to think God looks at us the way that we look at puppies.
yeah, he's like, oh, that's cute.
Look at them.
They shit in the box. Good job.
Stay out of my shoes, buddy.
They shit outside. That's amazing. Good job.
Fantastic. Just to steelman the Catholics a little bit, the cathedral's not to impress God, it's to help you have like even the tiniest slice of the divine experience when you go there.
Yeah.
To infuse your the place of worship with godliness, which is like in the case of physical things to say beauty. Just to give them a bit of their shrift, but it actually reminds me of something I was intending to expand on earlier, which is there's actually, like, real quick, to solve the problem of like what happens after we die, just for the record, for all of you Abrahamic faith people out there, there is mystic grounding to believe in reincarnation, and more than a few types of early Christians believed in reincarnation, including the Gnostics that we've been talking up so readily tonight. So just saying.
Oh, can I tell you Sanya Avatara's fucking perspective?
Please.
The universe is cyclical and eternal, no beginning, no end. So this is my words, not hers, but what I would perceive is there's a singularity. Singularity bursts into separation. Separation creates the known universe. Then we got, supermassive black holes and other, astrological phenomena that suck everything back into the singularity. Once the singularity is recreated, everything's reunited, et cetera, et cetera. Then we basically, have our unity with God again. Maybe that's our opportunity for like a timeless afterlife, because literally in a singularity, there's no such existence as time. And then the cycle starts again. And so that's comforting to me, because on one hand, like, plays into string theory and eternity, and I can move my fingers this way in this existence, and in next existence I'll move my fingers this way, and technically, like, reality can be a little bit separate. So you have determinism in the fact that kind of like variables add into other variables, et cetera, et cetera. But then you also have choice or free will, where you can make modifications, or different variables can affect things differently, because the world is so minute and crazy and deep and intricate, that eternity is like we were talking about, like if you could conceptualize it, then it's not part of God. You can say the word eternity, you can't actually understand it.
Right, or like count to infinity.
Right. Like you can imagine the number going up, and you can imagine the number going up in perpetuity, but perpetuity is not something that you could experience as like a mortal creature.
But by defining it, you're immediately setting other things outside of it, which would be less than the totality of all that is.
Yeah, and see, and that's like the mind fucks where existence and life and spirituality. Like, listen, I'm the one thing that I'm not okay with, because like if there's a bunch of like materialists, like fucking materialist anti-theists in chat or whatever, I've been looking at them, but I'll look at them in a minute. My problem is your certainty. Okay, that's my problem. I have shitloads of uncertainty. I don't know what the world is like. I don't know what the afterlife is like. I don't know what the nature of God is. I don't know any of this shit. I'm saying that it's interesting to contemplate mortality, morality, existential angst, and a whole bunch of shit that we deal with as human beings, and kind of like, is there a purpose to life? And not only like, does it matter? Like all these questions. I'm asking all these questions, and I'm not finding hard answers. I'm finding more questions. So if your answer is super simple, where it's like, nope, nothing matters, no God, go fuck yourself, like go do heroin, do whatever you want, like you're not giving and like if you're miserable as a result, where your answers like kind of give you a shitty life, then I don't think you're asking enough questions. That would be my frustration with materialists who think that they know everything.
Yeah, that's fair. And you know what? The materials make a really good case a lot of the time. But here's the thing: I'm bored with that. It's boring. I like everything that is being infused with meaning. I like it quite a bit, and I don't want to stop.
Yeah.
And
Nice.
I really like. So I guess a perspective that I affect a lot of the time is really similar. Like it's the certainty that bothers me. I never get into arguments with agnostics, and I barely get into arguments with atheists. I get into arguments with anti-theists who, like, whether they realize it or not, like literally want me and the ideas that more or less define me at this point to not exist. And they're like, it's always awkward because as a heterosexual cisgendered white man, it's incredibly uncomfortable to levy this argument. But like at what point do I get to tell you you're being bigoted?
Yeah.
Like you let me know.
Well, I think the point
is
I think the very sincere point is to flip the arguments on their head. So we were kind of talking about like communists and like the anti-hegemony. The cool thing about liberalism is it has like a consistent set of universal principles that can be flipped. So it's like, I'm not supposed to be bigoted to you. Well, guess what, motherfucker? You start being bigoted to me, I'll fucking throat chop your ass. Like. But the problem is liberals don't have a fucking spine, so they don't know how to say like, hey, listen, this is a reciprocal rule set, with the expectation that you will be reciprocal. And if you're not reciprocal, then that's where things get hairy. The problem is we've been so used to having a reciprocal rule set that everybody abides by that we're not ready when people say, no, I don't want to participate in reciprocity. So that's where, for me, I think liberals and centrists and Democrat, like moderates and normies, I think they need to start understanding a world in which people are not reciprocal. And so how do you categorize the people who are willing to create and help you with a reciprocal reality in which you help each other? And then who are the people who are saying like, no matter what, no matter how nice, no matter how kind, no matter how whatever you are, I don't care. I'm going to do my best to fuck you over. And then identifying those two classes of people and being able to deal with each class of people, I think, is incredibly important. I think that's the world that, unfortunately, we're kind of careening to.
Right.
But it's been an hour and 15 minutes. It's been a beautiful hour and 15 minutes. I loved it. It was deep and unafraid to explore kind of the fucked up things or the things that a lot of people don't like to talk about. I am not going to be surprised if I do post the conversation with Satya Avatara, because basically, like, I'm not making fun of her. I'm literally describing her. So she has like a, you know, kind of like a Hindu like chakra thing. She's wearing a yarmulke. She's got like blue hair, and she's wearing like a yogi traditional garb. And I was like, where is this going to go? And then it went exactly where it needed to go. And it was perfect. And she was like, I'm a syncretist, Gnostic, mystic who's trying to connect with the fundamentals of the universe and thinks that the world would be a better place if more people did it. And I was like, that kicks ass. What else? Like,
Well, and there's going
that
to
was the
be
conversation.
there's going to be innumerable ways that people attempt to do that, and for the record, I think that's a good thing. I do not envision a world in which there is like one cohesive religion or one dominant religion being better than the one that we are. I don't even necessarily want the atheists to convert, because I think they are who they are for a reason, and I want their perspective as well. I just think that I don't understand why we have to got like the it's this phrase and it always comes up. I don't understand why we have to throw the baby out with the bathwater, because there are people finding ways to engage with these ideas in which they don't produce structures of oppression. So like give us a minute. We've been doing religion for like 100,000 years. We've been using fire for 1,000,000 years, and no one ever said like, "Hey, let's stop using fire because we have furs now." So we
Right.
shouldn't we shouldn't say let's stop using religion because we have science now.
Right. Thank you. Another topic that we'll discuss another time is scientism being fucking frustrating as shit.
I'm not a
But
fan.
if you have anything that you care about, charities, socials that you want to shout out, if you want to invite people to the Discord so they can argue with you, if you want to give them your Twitter handle so they can argue with you, shout out your passions and what you want, and then I'm probably going to answer some questions from chat, and we're going to call it.
Absolutely. So I
Excuse
have
me.
a WordPress blog that I have not been working hard enough on lately, but I will be getting back to very soon. It is thomasconcepts.wordpress.com. On Twitter, I'm Concepts Thomas. On YouTube and Twitch, I am Dr. Concepts. Once again, not technically a doctor. And I am a writer and an explorer of ideas, and I like to talk about every idea I can all the time. But I also write things, and people pay me to write things for them and then put their name on them. So if you want a set of
Hell
words
yeah.
strung together, let me know. And at the moment, my rates are very reasonable. And if you check out the blog, there's a little bit of gardening stuff, a little bit of media analysis. My varied interests will be represented over time, but there is fiction. If you really want to get a sense of what I'm like as a writer, check out the fiction section. That's thomasconcepts.wordpress.com.
Awesome. Thanks, buddy. It was
Thank
fucking great.
you.
We'll do
I
it
had a
again
great time.
soon. Yeah.
Absolutely. You have a good night.
All right. I will. You too. Catch you. All right. Let's get physical. So I know tonight was a little bit more of a hodgepodge. I know tonight was a little bit interesting. Launched into some. Hold on one second. Let me make sure that I'm fucking muted and shit. Hold on. Let me make sure that you're muted. Go to my channel. My channel. Are we live on both ends? Yay! All right, cool. So, if you did a don't, let me go full cam. 1 second. Boom, 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 boom. Hi, I'm getting sweaty. But what I loved about that is number one. So, Counter Revolution. I kind of want to summarize this real quick because I do think it's important. Counter Revolution reached out to me and basically said, hey, listen, I think I have a summary of the ideas that you're wrestling with, and I think I can help you conceptualize this stuff better. The main things that I took away from our conversation was basically there is a flow of leftist academic thought that goes from Gramsci and down into the critical race theorists. And so there are plenty of liberals and progressives who just want to be anti-racist and who just want to be, woke in a positive way, who are just trying to do the best that they can with the ideas that they're being presented. And there are some frames like intersectionality and power dynamics and this kind of stuff that are worthy of contemplation through a frame. So, for instance, if you look at Marx's critiques of capitalism, I don't really have a problem with him critiquing capitalism because he's pointing out things that are flawed within the system. His prescriptions are dog shit, though. And so the prescription of like, we're going to live in like a moneyless, stateless, classless society. Yeah, maybe in a post-scarcity Star Trek level world, maybe we'll pull that off. Or decommodification of basic human need and workers owning the means of production being a step towards that goal. I don't see any evidence that that's actually going to make the world a better place. And I think we have a lot of other challenges that basically that solution doesn't help. So just because you're good at pointing out problems doesn't mean that your solutions are worth a fuck. So that's the way that I feel about critical race theory, where you can look at intersectionality or power dynamics or whatever, and you can be good at describing problems, but that doesn't mean that abolishing race or abolishing class or abolishing sex or gender or any of that kind of shit is worth a fuck as a prescription. So that's how I feel about it. So drawing the narrative, the narrative from the descriptive criticisms of all these people and their game plans on how to change society is to point out that this is leftist fucking bullshit. And it is to ask people to conceptualize within the concept of, let's say that there's an army that's pro-leftism and an army that's anti-left, and then a bunch of like centrists who don't know enough to pick a side. Where are you? Are you a centrist? Are you an anti-leftist? Or are you a leftist? And where are you in that army, and how sincere are you in your beliefs, and what are you fighting for in this, that, the other? There are parts of every faction that could be sincerely held and make the world a better place, and then there are parts of every faction that can make the world a worse place. And so challenging yourselves and asking those questions, I think, is an important conception, and admitting the narrative link between these thought leaders and the propaganda that they spew out, I think, is something worthy of acknowledgement and contemplation. And I think leftists need to just fucking own their bullshit. So that would be my summary of the first conversation. On the second conversation, I love contemplating the spiritual and the religious and all that kind of shit. And I'm not afraid to do it. And I think it's important. And I respect other people who do it. If that's too much woo and voodoo for you, then, stop being such a fucking pussy. Life is interesting and it's complex, and being a mortal creature sucks. But maybe if you can find a way to make peace with it, you can live a good life. So if we can figure out how to make peace with it and contemplate interesting things, then we should do so. Finally, all right, let's do support links real quick. Patreon.com/counterpoints. You should be able to spell it. Patreon.com/COUNTERPOINTS. You can become a donor there. When we get copyright struck, we're going to start uploading our videos there. We're just figuring it out, how we're going to do that. So you're going to get early access to the shit that gets fucking zucked. Then you can be a member on YouTube. You can do super chats on YouTube. You can be a subscriber on Twitch, and you can do bits and donos on Twitch. And 100% of this month is going to Ukraine for humanitarian relief and support for the army. And next month, if there's still a Ukrainian army, probably 100% of next month will be going to Ukraine as well. And if there isn't, then we might throw a little bit of dollary dues towards the
Base
refugees, but
TF
after that, we're probably going to call it.
Love
So,
you, buddy. Slava
Motherfucker.
Ukraini. Check DMs and approve
Have I just been
thumbnail.
echoing in your
Lindsay
fucking
is a
earballs the
moron.
entire time?
Leftism cringe. Centrism is the future. We are planting trees we will never sit in the shade of.
Oh, no, good. It was dono sounds. Sorry. My fucking having a crazy fucking headache, so I'm sorry for talking over the dono sounds. But let's do it. I'm going to scroll. IPA lot says, what the fuck retarded shit is this? I don't know. Fuck you, IPA. Come on to mask off. We'll fucking tear your anti-theist ass a new asshole. Chromebot at Counterpoint says, lapsed Catholic. I'm just saying I'm more likely to return to Catholicism than any form of Christianity. Yeah, that's fine. Depends on the Protestants. Most of the megachurches I've seen aren't Catholic. True. Now tell Dr. Concepts to come back to Twitch chat when you're done. All right, Dr. Concepts, come back to Twitch chat. The fuck? Why did it hyperlink the book club? All right, anyways, we're caught up on Twitch. So, it's cold out. Check out the latest. All right, Twitch, we are caught up. If you want to ask questions, ask questions. I'm going to go over to YouTube. This is a conversation. All right, let's scroll. If you want to ask questions now at Counterpoints in chat. So, Taysgrove, check DMs and approve the thumbnail. All right, let me go to my Discord real quick. Oh, my body. Why am I so fucking old? Why does everything hurt? I can't wait to rejoin the unity of the fucking oneness where my fucking bones don't have to hurt anymore. What is the... Yes, it's approved, you fuck. What is the meaning of class? I don't know. You should probably change what is the meaning to something else. But besides that, the fucking thumb is perfect. Yeah. So, anyways, thumbnail's fucking perfect. I would change the title. Christian Valeris at Counterpoints. First convo was better, but Dr. Concept seems based. Okay, well, that's interesting. I'm happy that anti-communism is better for you. Raptor Man, Counterpoints. That was a great conversation with Dr. Concepts. Thank you, buddy. Sincerely appreciated. Taysgrove, basis fuck talks. Love you, buddy. Slava Ukraina. Check DMs and improve the thumbnail. Lindsay is a moron. Leftism is cringe. Centrism is the future. We are planting trees we will never sit in the shade of. Beautiful. Beautifully said. Dangerous Days at Counterpoints. Life is interesting and beautiful because we are mortal. If we weren't, there is no imperative to learn and explore. Kind of true. At Counterpoints, what content do you expect to get copyrighted? Your Alien videos? Alien videos are already copyrighted, and Warhammer stuff is a hodgepodge. Basically, I had 2 Warhammer 40k episodes that were zucked last week. And then this week it wasn't zucked for some reason. I have no idea what the fuck is going on, but I don't really care. Padre Jenkin 138 Counterpoints. How do we negotiate with far left PC zealots when they have denied anyone not ready to hand over power and have, if you're not with us, you're against us mindset? You fucking fight them. You fight them. You fight them. You fight them in the shores. You fight them in the skies. You fight them in the seas. You fight them on Twitter. You fight them on Twitch. You fight them in their knees. And that's a Churchill fucking imitation. So, yeah, basically just fight them. Fight them all the time. Try to be nice to them, but show them that, like, libertarianism and conservatism and fiscal conservatism and social conservatism have some arguments that are worthy of consideration. That would be my thing. And then try to filter them back towards the center. That's what I would say. As an enlightened centrist anti-leftist who is on the anti-leftist fucking army as we described in the Gramscian fucking bullshit. So, hey, I'm Catholic, dropped in at the right time, I guess. Yeah, perfect. Rewind an hour, you'll be good. Which 40k army will win at the end? I would say the Necrons, because they're the only race that can survive the end of the universe. But I would say it's going to be a hodgepodge, and chances are it's going to be like... I think, like, what's actually going to happen is, like, the Imperials are going to fight, like, Chaos in, like, a giant ultimate battle, and then, like, the universe will, like, suck out of existence. But they'll never actually do that, because that would involve giving up... that would involve giving up their revenue stream. So, ChromeVod says NIDS. I don't think so. I think the Necrons can take on the NIDS pretty hard. So, yep. Christian Valeris at Counterpoints. Between the far left and the far right, it might be time to start training your centrist army. More weapons vids, please. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, we'll be doing more of that shit. And we'll be using the Russian-Ukraine conflict as an excuse to do so. So, all right. I appreciate you guys. I'm exhausted. My bones hurt like a motherfucker. Hit me up in Twitter DMs if I missed your fucking dono earlier, and I'm gonna go pound water, and I'm gonna leave the I'm gonna leave chat up for a bit. So if you want to fight in chat, go ahead and do so. But I do appreciate you guys, and I will try to do a more. I will try to do like a more like interactive episode and drama focused episode next week. I just I double booked this week and I didn't want to fuck anybody over. Cole G at Counterpoints. You confessed to heresy earlier there. Favorite traitor legion? Alpha Legion. Duh. Alpha Legion. I would do okay, so number one, let me nerd out for a second. You got me back. Give me a second. Number one, Alpha Legion. Okay? Because they're actually loyalists and they just do like fucked up shit all the time, right? And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use Chaos Space Marine rules, but there is a host called the Crusader Host. Back before the Horus Heresy, there was a bunch of Marines. I think it was like 10 Marines from like each Legion or something like that were given over to the Crusader Host, and they were like the representatives of their Legion on Terra. And so they would cycle out in the different representatives of the legions in order to be the representatives of the different legions. But what happened when the Horus Heresy broke out is Rogel Dorn imprisoned all of them and then released the loyalists. And there were some of the Crusader hosts who knew that the writing was on the wall and they escaped. So what I want to do is I want to do a Crusader host renegade like chapter, but instead I'm basically going to take like Malkador the Sigilite's brand, and I'm going to paint them in original Legion colors. So like the Death Guard will be the Dusk Raiders, so they'll have like the red arms and the black armor. I'm trying to think of what else. The Word Bearers will be like white and blue. Not the World Bearers, the World Eaters. I forget everybody else, but I'm going to paint like original Alpha Legion. Or not Alpha Legion. I'll do original Alpha Legion, original Iron Warriors, and original, who is it? Luna Wolves. So that's my game plan. Yeah. So hope that was sufficiently nerdy for everybody. Thank you to Cole G for being a member. Raptor Man, it's Warhammer 40k. Go check out my Warhammer 40k playlist. I appreciate you. Should center right and center left ally? Yeah, but we're not going to. So it's okay. All right. I appreciate y'all. I'm out. I'm throwing you on the ending screen. Bullshit with each other for a minute and then go the fuck to sleep. I'll catch y'all next week and sooner. Sooner if you're in my Discord. Bye.